nice. We testing things out. Things? We testing things out. Ready to be the first? Ready for the bot chicken? Okay, just make sure you guys are hearing it. Whenever my character like pops out, he freaking makes like the pufferfish sound. Hits me with the mic's just a little quiet. Okay, I shall turn that up. Where's the mic? Where's the mic? Or maybe it was just because I was speaking far away. Is this better? I don't know if it's better. Squeaky.
Enforced equilibrium.
Hi, Tyson. Oh, it didn't show me what that was. Kind of the same? Okay. I don't know why my mic is... I'm trying out the, what's it called? I'm trying out a new... Oh, I think I might know why. I think it's because all of these are on. How's this? I think that's better. It might be better. Hello, buddo. Can't save you the bot chicken. Thank you for the hydrate. I do have hydration forms here. Dude, all this game wants me to do is this build. And that's why I'm gonna keep spamming the exact same build every time. 1, 2.
Enforced equilibrium.
Oh my god, and there's a Mundo right there? That's crazy. Oh my god. How are you feeling today, Cass? Thank for the heart, thank for the roses. But yeah, let me know if my mic's any better or worse or a nice moon row. You went to work? Oh no, yeah, that isn't the best. Also, I'm streaming now once again within OBS, but I got the studio thing set up that I sent you, Bert. So that's cool. Cool stuff, cool stuff. Don't worry, me doctor. Seriously, like I have to go this build every single time. Hi Chris, welcome in. Thank you for 10 TikToks, Birdo. Are we going for the lighting the thing? I haven't gotten around to it, but it's on my list. I'll put in a... Now this is gonna look aggressive. I'm gonna put that out there first. Hockey boyos, hello. in Discord. Okay, let's grow up. Let's not scissor me. Shout out me for sharing the live. Biggest fan. Bardosis. Bardosis Petrocious. Alright, I'll put in the general. This is what it looks like. It looks crazy, but it's nice at the same time. Because like the TikTok is off to the side, has its own scenes. You can see the YouTube and the Twitch chat, like they're completely combined, and you can see where they're coming from each. So it's nice. Sorry for Windows noises. Trying to stay warm. I'm glad you're trying to stay warm. Also, how are you gonna go to work with the flu? That's crazy. Did believe in the bot check-in. Yeah, we're having a nice, dark and quiet time after we've all settled in. I feel like we should listen to some YouTube. Maybe listen to some murder YouTube. Could be a nice thing. Thank you for this. I love that tactician. That little squinky guy is so freaking cute. What do I... He's so cute. The way that he just like waddles around. Allurvit. Allurvit. We gotta put Mundo Mundo in so he can start scaling. I meant Mundo Mundo. Scion Scion. The comment chat. I actually need your help with something that I have a question for a later time. Wait. She need your help with something that I have a question for a later time. Questions. Answers. Thoughts. Something, a little something here, a little something there. But yeah, this build is what I've done the last 4 times. So all those games that you see at the over there, the show screen. Oh, that's been from this. So really not that bad. Berto, they were like all the TikTok live. Yeah, just keep it calm. TFT on. I just need to calm it down with my econ. Because sometimes I be spending. I don't need to be spending that much. Give us 2 bows right now. Please. Please, 2 bows. Please, please, please. Dude, this is so nice right now. Stealing. Ooh, she's stealing. I don't even have Mobalytics open because I've played this comp so many times. Didn't y'all say yesterday was update day or something? So the update for this was actually last week. But I'm fighting it because we need a new shop. Shop is not updated. It is not like Fortnite where it blesses us with a nightly update. So I've been yearning. I've been yearning for a little something something. Not exactly what we're looking for. Not at all exactly what we're looking for, but it's fine. We'll figure something out. Yeah, for fortnights. Like, not the usual fortnight, for fortnights.
The waves will drag you down unless you
Oh, wait. Forgot I should be 16 to... I mean, not 16, level 6 to...
It must be done.
to start my roll-on, my Rolex collection. So let me switch career paths and become a Shopley and TFTI here. Yeah, because you will not be like pressured. You will have no pressure to freaking do anything. They're probably doing stuff. But holy cow. I need to shop refresh. It's only because like they're teasing things. And that's why it's a pain. Like things are being teasified. And I need them. I need all those things. I need those items. I mean, I kind of like this. It's only the second one. Yeah. That's nice just because I am going to be focusing all my money on... Oh, there's no counter this game, T. I'm going to be spending all my money on re-rolling. For a second I thought he was a 2-star and I was like, damn, what did I get into that? Okay, guys. Shall we listen to some murder? I might pull it up on... Well... I see all the leaks. They're super leaky around here. Dang. Two Titans. Damn, imagine the thing that you get the rest of the game is a Blitzcrank. That's painful. Even though it's very much alive and well right now and kind of stomping on me, that sucks. Because that would make an ass out of you and me. That's the rules. Let me see something. Not contested. Yeah. That's a worse one cost to get as your freaking Deacon. Deke machine. Exactly. Have you ever had a dream where you and then you wish that you could, so then you can't, but you shan't? Alright guys, we need to make sure that I'm not rerolling too much. Hold the line! I just need more items. Yes. Reroll ban until 4-2. Ah, I don't need that though. I would love to pick them up, but I cannot. I need to get speedy with it. Should everybody be able to listen to the murder stuff we're about to listen to? Or should only Twitch? Okay, but what if the reroll thing is free? I was trying to interject himself. Twitch because we Twitch. What happened to Geo? Press forbidden button. But it was a free. It was free though. Fine. No touch until 4-2. Creepy uncle becomes stepfather and does the unthinkable. Holy cow. How I caught the BTK killer. No, that's T. I don't think you guys can hear this. Wait, so if the first thing that I elim is a Kaboku and I have Kaboku unlocked, do I get a Kaboku? Or does it just give me the coins? Because I saw that one point where I got a coin. I need some freaking Pandora's items. Where the heck, man? Oh, there it is.
If there was someone that scared the shit out of me when I was younger, it was this.
Bind, torture, kill, or BTK. Words synonymous with the serial killer, Dennis Rader.
This guy talks about killing like you and I talk about changing clothes.
Hi, I'm Nick from True Crime Uncut, and welcome to Questions With. This week we're speaking to homicide detective Tim Relf about how he helped capture the notorious BTK serial killer following 10 murders and a 30-year manhunt.
We talked to him for many, many hours. He indicated that this is the greatest accomplishment of his life, and he hadn't really been able to talk about it. Wichita didn't have a boogeyman, they had BTK. That's what your family was afraid of. Before then, we had never seen someone, and it would be a long time to learn it, but we'd never seen someone that killed for sport. It's hard to explain the shadow that he kind of put over the city back in the 70s, especially ladies that lived by themselves came home and checked their phone lines. People just became suspicious of people for the first time. Evidence doesn't change, you know, people's memory, people's stories, even people's recollection of what someone looks like. That all changes over time. It's just part of the human mind, but evidence doesn't change. And so I got very familiar with the crime scenes.
We kind of moved right there.
With what evidence
Is
was
this
available.
better now?
I was born and raised in Wichita, and so when I was a small child, I knew about the Otero murders from the day it occurred because they lived near a school that my mother would drop off a couple of my brothers and sisters to a school nearby, and so as we drove by that area, it always concerned me. The 3 older children had come home, and they had found their mother and father. And the first responders, or the first people that arrived at that time, they went to the bedroom, they found the father and the mother, and then the older children didn't want their younger siblings to come home and find us because they thought they were at school. And so the officers went to their elementary schools in the area and found that both of the younger siblings had not made it to school that day. And they searched the rest of the house, and on the top floor in a different bedroom, they would find the young Joey Otero. They didn't realize there was a basement because it kind of looked like a pantry door.
That's crazy.
And so they went down into the basement, and then they located it in kind of a utility room. They would find the body of Josephine Otero. A lot of times in law enforcement, you grab way more than what you know, just on the possibility that something may come up. And at that time, they took into custody a lot of materials, you know, bedding and stuff like that, not really knowing what value it had at that time. And many, many years later, we would extract a genetic profile from a piece of that evidence.
Fizz,
Catherine was a
literally
young
go
girl that,
home.
she lived right on the outskirts of Wichita State campus, and on this day, her brother Kevin had come. They were having lunch, and they just went by her house. And when they went by the house, the intruder was already in the house, and the intruder tried to tie up Kevin. During that whole series of events, a struggle broke out, and the intruder would shoot Kevin. He'd shoot him twice in the forehead and shot him right here. I think.
So I just want to listen to Summer Sanchez because she's my girl. She got any playlists? Colts, crime, and
Hello
heinous
everyone, thank you so much for being here and Happy New Year. I cannot believe that we are now in 2023. This year flew by.
Crazy.
If you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Summer
interesting.
Sanchez, and on this channel
So
we
if it's
talk
someone
about
that
crime,
you-
cults, and heinous history. Today's case is a bizarre and very disturbing one, and it's also the first serial killer that we've ever discussed on this channel. This man has been described as one of America's worst serial killers, and there's a chance that you might have never even heard of him. Today we're going to be talking about Gerard John Schaefer Jr. He's most commonly called by his middle name John, so that's how I'm going to refer to him throughout this video.
Johnny
So John
boy.
Schaefer was actually a deputy for the Martin County, Florida Sheriff's Department when he was finally caught and arrested for his crimes. And let me just tell you, you're going to be so angry with how this was handled initially, because if things would have went differently, there's a lot of people that would still be alive. John killed a lot of his victims in an area of St. Lucie County, Florida called Hutchinson Island near Blind Beach Creek, which is how he got the name the Butcher of Blind Creek. In addition to being a serial killer, John liked to write stories, and he considered himself a very gifted fiction crime writer. A lot of the stuff that he wrote is considered to be actually personal logs of some of the crimes that he committed. And I've read some of his writings, and it is probably the most vile, sadistic stuff that I've ever read. There's a lot of really interesting information out there about this case. There are books and documentaries, and there are even some interviews with John Schaefer that are available here on YouTube. And this guy really creeps me out.
When you do a work, and this was to be a work, the ghoul, this person, all right, is a commodity. He is a scary character. And when you read this, you get scared. By the time you get to the end, you say, wow, he's got to be wrong, you know, like that. Because this is what's really scary. King Kong isn't scary. Fuad Ramsey isn't scary. This is scary.
People very close to this case and close to John Schaefer have said that he makes Ted Bundy
you
look
do
like
get
a
a-
Boy Scout.
Oh,
And
no,
speaking of
he's-
Ted Bundy, he actually pops up in this case, and so do a couple of other very prolific serial killers.
Oh,
Now,
Boy
John
Scouts,
is
yeah,
commonly referred to as a
especially
serial
Eagle
killer, but he was
Scouts,
actually
those
only
are a
convicted
problem.
of 2 murders in the end. But he is suspected in much more than just 2 murders. And there's a lot of evidence that actually backs this up, which we'll talk about later. Some estimates have John's victim count at least 28, but we'll probably never actually know how many people he killed. Now, we have a lot to go over in this case, so let's just go ahead and jump into it. Gerard John Schaefer was born on March 26, 1946 in Neenah, Wisconsin. John was the oldest of 3 children, and his parents were Doris and Gerard Sr., also known as Jerry. His father, Jerry, was a traveling salesman for a company called Kimberly-Clark, which is a company that mostly produces paper products. And from the outside, the family seemed pretty ordinary. They were a religious family, and they were very involved in their Catholic faith, and the children even attended a private Catholic school. Because of Jerry's job as a traveling salesman, the family actually ended up moving around quite a bit. They lived in Wisconsin, Tennessee, and Georgia before finally settling down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida in 1960. And once they settled down in Fort Lauderdale, the family just kind of dove right into the local social scene. They joined the local country club and yacht club, and they seemed to just blend right into society. But things were actually not good in the home. Doris and Jerry had a terrible relationship. Jerry earned a good living, like he was a good provider, but he was gone on business a lot, which left Doris alone by herself a lot with the children. Jerry was also a heavy drinker, and he also had a lot of affairs while he was on the road for his job. Jerry and Doris do eventually get divorced, but this does not happen until way later, till when John is actually in college. Jerry didn't have a good relationship with John either. They only ever really bonded over like outdoorsy stuff. Like they both like to hunt and fish, and this was something that they did together. This was pretty much the only time they really ever spent together. Jerry just wasn't really interested in John overall, and they had a pretty turbulent relationship, and John spent most of his childhood craving his father's attention. John actually said that he always felt like an illegitimate child and the product of a shotgun wedding. And he felt like his father never loved him as much as he loved his younger sister, Sarah. Jerry and Sarah had a very close relationship. John was always very jealous of that. And it definitely seems as though this intense jealousy that John was feeling towards Sarah and Jerry's relationship manifested itself in some really unhealthy ways. For example, when John would play pretend games with the other children, like Cops and Robbers or something like that, a game where in the end someone would die, John always wanted to be the one in the game that would be killed. And he later explained that he started having these feelings of wanting to die because he could never please his father. And so this intense feeling of inadequacy made him fantasize about dying quite often. And keep in mind, he's very young at this age. He's not even a teenager. John would also wander into the nearby woods, and he would go there alone, and he would kill animals. This was something that he enjoyed, which we know.
Sorry, we're switching something. I've already heard this one. I also have to be entertained. Hell no. No Bilgewater. Banned.
Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today will be the very...
Fine, we can
Hello
go back to
everyone.
the other one.
Thank you so much for being here, and Happy New Year. I cannot believe that we are now in 2023.
We have
This
switched
year
twice.
flew by. If you are...
Okay, 3rd time's a charm.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I hope you've all had a great week. If you are new
I had to
here,
find
please
one
consider
that I hadn't
subscribing
heard
if you
before
end up
and was
liking this
paced
video.
fine.
So today we are in Canada, and we're going to be talking about the Abbotsford Killer. This killer basically terrorized the city of Abbotsford, British Columbia in the mid-90s. Not only did this person commit some absolutely brutal crimes, but he literally taunted
I love
the
that
local police and the community
www.
for months. I think what made this whole situation even creepier was that this all started around Halloween time. In fact, the first publicized attack happened on Friday the 13th.
Me clicking that
October 1995.
www
And
just
side
bugged
note,
out my
Friday
chat.
the 13th
I can't
only
even see
happens
chat
in
anymore.
October, once every like 5 to 11 years. We had one in 1995, which is the year that this case took place, and we actually have a Friday the 13th in October of this year, 2023. The city of Abbotsford was paralyzed with fear. People were literally packing up and moving because of this crazed killer that was on the loose. To this day, there are still some pretty big questions concerning the killer in this case. The biggest one being, was he a serial killer? We actually still don't have a solid answer to that question. But after combing through so much information on this man, I can tell you with 100% certainty that if he wasn't a serial killer, he would have been if he wouldn't have been caught. And I feel like this might be a lengthy video, so let's just go ahead and jump in. It was close to midnight on Friday the 13th, October 1995, in the city of Abbotsford, British Columbia. Two 16-year-old local girls, Misty Cockerell and Tanya Smith, were walking down a dark, deserted sidewalk on their way to a friend's house. The girls had been hanging out with some new friends all evening at a party in the nearby town of Surrey, and after that party was over, their new friends dropped the two girls off at Misty's house in Abbotsford, where they had planned to have a sleepover that night. Misty's mother and stepfather had went out for the evening, and by the time that Misty and Tanya were dropped off at Misty's house, her parents still weren't back. So, like most teenagers, the girls thought that they should take advantage of this freedom, and even though Misty had a curfew, she and Tanya decided to walk 5 blocks to a friend's house where there was a birthday party happening. On their way, they were just, talking, and they were joking around about how it was Friday the 13th, and they were outside alone in the dark, and how they really hoped that they didn't meet a crazed killer that night. And as they continued walking, they came to a hedgerow that separated the sidewalk from the mostly abandoned parking lot of a hospital, when suddenly a dark figure appeared from the hedges holding a baseball bat. Before they even had time to think, the man had rushed over and shoved the girls through the hedges and onto the hospital parking lot, and then he demanded that they take off all their clothes. The girls were absolutely terrified, and so Tanya immediately complies and she takes off her clothes. But Misty didn't. She was just completely frozen in fear. The man didn't seem to mind though, because he turned his entire focus to Tanya. He threw Tanya to the ground, dropped down on his knees, then he set down his baseball bat so he could unbutton his pants and begin assaulting Tanya. Misty's just watching this happen in horror as her best friend is being assaulted by this man, and she doesn't know what to do. She could have actually ran at this point. The man's attention was totally on Tanya, not her, but she didn't run. Instead, she grabbed the baseball bat and she hit the attacker as hard as she could across his shoulders. This was enough to knock him back,
Love that.
But unfortunately,
Yes.
it wasn't enough to do any real damage. And now the man
Get
is
her
just
butt.
angry.
Get his
he
butt.
stands up and he deflects Misty's second swing, and then he grabs the bat from her. Misty immediately just starts apologizing and begging him not to hurt her,
Oh, sorry.
but nothing she said worked, and
Sorry,
the
didn't
man
mean to.
proceeded to beat her with the baseball bat.
No.
Misty counted 7 blows before she finally went unconscious. At around 5 a.m. the next morning, a badly beaten young girl came stumbling into a hospital in Abbotsford. The girl had a broken hand and arm, and she had severe damage to her skull. She was also extremely hypothermic, and she was basically just barely clinging on to life.
Honestly,
The
we played
nurses and doctors
TFC. I
started
realized I
working
messed
on
up
the
my
girl
YouTube
immediately, and they learned that this
title.
was Misty Cockerell. Hospital staff could tell right away that Misty had been brutally attacked, and whoever had done this to her had meant to kill her. At first, the only information that they could really get from Misty in her current condition was that she and her friend Tanya had been attacked by a man with a baseball bat, but she couldn't tell them where the attack happened so that they could go and search for Tanya. But now they know that there is another victim, but they don't know who she is or how to
Yes,
find her.
Chris, that's
Nurses
exactly
called
what
police
happened.
to tell them what was going on, and they set into immediate action. They also contacted Misty's mother to give her the unfortunate news that her daughter had been assaulted, and she was currently in very critical condition. Misty's mother, Janet, had been waiting for her daughter to return home since she had last seen her that night before she left for the party in Surrey, and she had really started to get worried when Misty never returned. So as soon as Janet gets this phone call, she rushes to the hospital to be by her daughter's side, and things were very touch and go with Misty's condition. They really did not know if she was going to live. By this point, Misty wasn't making much sense when she was asked any questions about Tanya or the attack. She was constantly drifting in and out of consciousness, and she would say really off the wall
My sweet
things
treat
like
is a
the attacker
coffee
was
can.
7 feet tall, and he was actually married to one of the nurses that worked at the hospital.
I hope you guys
and
are
at
enjoying
one
listening
point
to
she
this
said that he worked at
and
a
getting
chocolate
things
factory.
done in the house,
so
or not doing
obviously
anything,
Misty
and
couldn't
just
provide much information
listening
in
to
her
the
current
YouTube video
state.
with me.
But Janet did tell the police that the Tanya that they were looking for was Tanya Smith, and she pointed her out in a yearbook. And with that, the investigation into Tanya's disappearance and the search for an attempted murderer and child abductor was officially underway. So just as this investigation is getting started in Abbotsford, a 911
real
call comes
hydration.
in around 7:30 a.m. So just a couple of hours after Misty arrived at the hospital. The caller was a man who had been out fishing early that morning in the Vedder Canal in the town of Chilliwack, which is only about 13 miles east of
Chilliwack.
Abbotsford. The man told the 911 operator that while he was out fishing early that morning, he had made a gruesome discovery. He found the nude, severely battered body of a young girl lying face down in about 6 inches of water and surrounded by brush. At this point, the Chilliwack police knew nothing about the missing girl from Abbotsford, so they began their own homicide investigation.
Well, that's a
but
bummer.
word of this dead body spread pretty quickly, and it didn't take long before Abbotsford police heard about it. And they did confirm that the dead body found in Chilliwack was in fact their missing person, Tanya Smith. Investigators from both Chilliwack and Abbotsford came out in droves to start processing the scene. A joint task force was put together between the two cities, but since the attack itself had actually occurred in Abbotsford, they took the lead in the investigation. And at the scene, they discovered that Tanya's clothes had been thrown into nearby trees and scattered all around. The way that this was done made it seem like the killer wanted Tanya to be found. They could also tell that Tanya's body had been dragged from the road and down into the water. An autopsy was performed on October 17th, and it was determined that Tanya had been sexually assaulted. Semen was found in her body, and it was collected for DNA analysis. They also found that Tanya's wounds looked very similar to Misty's wounds, so it was determined that the weapon used on Tanya had also been a baseball bat. She had broken bones in her arms, just like Misty, which told police that she had thrown her arms up to defend herself. She had been beaten very aggressively on her head. She had fractures all over her skull. But Tanya's cause of death was not
Did I miss anything?
blunt force trauma like everyone
Bad
had
or good?
anticipated. She actually died from drowning, meaning that Tanya was still alive when the killer dumped her into the Vedder Canal. Tanya could have been saved since the fishermen found her very early the next morning after the attack. But because the killer dumped her face down and Tanya was likely unconscious when she was left in just 6 inches of water, she had drowned. Police released a statement to the public about the murder of Tanya and the attempted murder of Misty, but they were very careful not to release all of the information they had. There were two big pieces of holdback information. The first piece of holdback information was where the initial site of the attack was located. This was kept out of the media for a couple of reasons, but the main reason was that the police actually didn't know where the attack had first taken place. They knew the general area was along Bevan Avenue. That's where the girls had been walking that night. But at this point, they didn't
That's
know
crazy.
that the girls had been shoved onto the
That's so
hospital
much time
parking lot.
of stream.
Misty was still in critical condition, and her
Yeah,
brain was swelling
never,
from all the trauma she had sustained.
cancel that
She
credit card,
actually ended up
please.
needing life-saving
And thank
surgery
you.
to relieve the pressure on her brain. So she was not a good source of information at this point. So the police still did not know where the attack had actually occurred. They basically just started searching all along Bevan Avenue just to see if they could find any evidence to tell them that this is where it had happened. And it wasn't until October 18th that a police officer discovered one of Misty's hoop earrings on the ground near the parking lot of
glorious.
the hospital. So it was
Keep it
determined
running
that
for
this
5
was
ever.
likely the site of the attack. And another very significant bit of information that was withheld from the public was that a bite mark had been found on Tanya's right breast during the autopsy. A swab of the bite mark was taken in hopes of finding some DNA still present, and miraculously, they did find some DNA.
Crazy.
Even though Tanya's body had been face down in the water for at least a few hours prior to being discovered. They were able to determine that the DNA from the semen and the saliva belonged to the same person. A tip line was set up, and police urged anyone with any information at all to call in and report it. After Misty's surgery, it really looked like she was
Aw,
gonna
they
pull
got the
through,
Trials
which
of
everyone was
Twilight
worried
thing.
about. However, this meant that Misty's life could be in danger. The killer was likely watching the news very closely for any updates on Misty's condition.
Yeah, those badges are
hoping that
rare.
she would die from her injuries. Once he hears that she's recovering, he will likely panic. Misty would be a huge liability for the killer, and he might try to find her and finish the job. So Misty was put under 24-hour protection. She had an officer guarding her day and night. Now, during her stay in the hospital, Misty hears that Tanya has been found, and she assumes that she had been found alive. Misty's mother, Janet, did not have the heart to tell her that Tanya hadn't survived. So Janet and the rest of the hospital staff and police just kind of went along with this. And so if Misty would receive any
This
flowers
isn't
or
Rocket League.
gifts,
No.
she would tell the nurses to
It's
send them
me
down
finding
to
a
her
build that
friend
I'm gonna
Tanya's
keep
room.
spamming for
days,
forever.
Misty went on thinking that her friend was going to make it, and they had both survived this awful experience together. She had no clue that Tanya was actually in the hospital morgue. And it wasn't until Janet was confident that Misty was getting better and would totally recover that she finally told her the truth about Tanya. And of course,
Aw.
Misty was absolutely
What a
devastated.
bummer.
But even though she was totally devastated, she started talking to police. Now with a clearer memory of that night. Misty said that when she had regained consciousness around 4 a.m. a few hours after the attack, she remembered pulling herself up and walking along a chain link fence and into a garden where she
Wait
said
a
she
second.
sat down and rested and likely lost consciousness again. She said she
Oopsie
woke
daisy.
back up in the garden, and that's when she saw the emergency room sign illuminating in the dark. So she slowly and painfully made her way to the hospital, where she stumbled inside and hospital staff began working on her. Misty also worked with a forensic artist to flesh out a sketch of what the killer looked like. Police knew that her recollection could be a little off due to her injuries, but they were pretty desperate at this point,
Where do
and
they
they
put
knew
him
that they
alive?
needed to try to get at least a rough idea of what this person looked like. This person was now a serious threat to the Misty described him as a white male,
Holy
looked to be
cow.
in his 30s, slim, lean face,
This is
and he
Rocket
had
League.
thinning,
Thank you for the
straggly
hype
hair
train.
and a drooping
Thank you for the resub
mustache.
for
Police got the
21
sketch and
months.
posted signs all around town and all over the
21
news, hoping that
months.
someone might recognize this person and call in the tip line. And someone did call in,
Thank
but
you,
not
thank
to
you, thank
report
you.
a tip. At around 11 o'clock
Frosty, this is a
a.m.
build
the
you
morning
should
of
try.
October 18th, a call came in
Get
to the
you
tip
out of the
line
silver
from a
pits of
man
hell.
claiming to be the person who had dropped Misty off at the hospital. But police knew at this point that Misty had walked herself from the crime scene to the hospital.
Well,
The
you said
officer
it
asked
is,
the man for
so-
his name and if he would mind coming in for
Awkward.
questioning, but the man refused and he hung up. Initially, this call could have
Ooh,
been
bow
chalked
right
up
for
to,
me.
you know, someone in the community maybe playing a prank. Unfortunately, those things do happen, but
I got it.
police knew that they at least needed to look into this call. But this would actually be the first of many interactions the police would have
Wait,
with the
this
killer
build?
in the
You've
coming
tried this
months.
one where you
This
just
first phone
re-roll
call
Bard a
kicked
bunch of
off
times?
The killer's sadistic campaign of terror over the city and the police. So even though police thought that there was a chance that this was just a phony call, they did decide to go ahead and look into it, and they ended up tracing the call to a payphone at the Circle K gas station in Abbotsford. So they hopped into their patrol cars and they headed straight over to the Circle K, but of
See, this
course
is
once they got there,
kinda
the man was
tough.
long gone. They asked around to see if there were any witnesses, but no one had any valuable information. But it wasn't long before the killer would contact police for a second time. In fact, he called later the same day as he had placed that first call. And when the police officer answered
Doing a
the
better
tip
job of
line,
this.
the man on the other end gave him the description of where the attack took place. And remember, this
1,
information was
7,
being withheld from
3,
the public.
4,
The police had
7.
actually just discovered the crime scene that morning, so there wouldn't have really been that much time for any information to leak somehow to the public. The caller said, quote, "I know where the murder happened, beside a walkway that runs north and south on a grassy knoll behind trees." The officer asked the man where he was getting this information, to which the man responded, quote, "I'm the killer. Her right nipple tasted pretty good," and then the line went dead. And now there was absolutely no doubt in anyone's mind that they had just spoken to the killer. He knew
Hello?
both pieces of holdback information: the location of the attack and the fact that Tanya had a bite mark on her right breast. The call was traced to another payphone, but this time it was across from the MSA hockey arena. This is in a pretty populated area of the city. It was a beautiful day that day, and there were people out walking all around the area of the payphone. So police were pretty hopeful that someone had seen something, and they spent over an hour interviewing people near the payphone, asking if they had seen anything
It does help.
or
This is
anyone
a different
suspicious.
re-roll
But again, somehow
thing.
there were no witnesses.
Meow.
They even dusted for fingerprints on the phone receiver, which they knew was
See,
a
that's
long
the thing.
shot
Because you got
because
6,
tons
and
of
the next
people
game you would have
touched
gotten
those phone
first. But
receivers,
as you can
but they
see,
still
it's
thought that it was
first,
worth a
7th,
shot.
3rd.
And then later that afternoon,
7th.
another 911 call came in from the same man.
Do you think I would be stupid enough to leave fingerprints behind when I make a phone call?
The killer had obviously been there watching them the entire time. He could have even been someone that they had interviewed on the street that day, and they would have no way of knowing. And then just 30 minutes after that call, yet another 911 call comes in from the same man.
This is a
but this
tactical
one
decision.
would really disturb police.
I'm the one. Just giving you the chance to try and find me.
and now there is a direct threat being made to the public. The killer is letting them know that it was just a matter of time before he killed again. And when the public found out about the
That
threats
was
for more
wicked
murders,
lucky.
they went into a panic. As I mentioned in the intro, people were literally packing up and
Ready for the bot
moving
check-in?
away because they
Think
were
it's
so
the level 1 high up
terrified.
train.
I'm moving back to Alberta. I'm not
And
gonna
thank
wait
you for
around
helping
to be
with
killed.
our PP goal for the month.
Something has to be done. They have to do something. Because we're losing our kids to these monsters, and he phones the police and he says he's going to do it again.
Once bustling areas of the city were now all but deserted. Taxi drivers started offering free rides home at night to anyone who needed it so they wouldn't have to walk the streets. Women were encouraged to travel in groups, and security guards started walking people out to their cars at night. Police and journalists have said that the fear that was ignited
I
in the
just rolled
community
past
was like nothing they had ever seen
freaking-
before. Tanya's funeral was finally held on October 21st, and she was buried at a local Mennonite cemetery. Her
Oh, well.
family had a headstone made
Wukong.
that had a photo of Tanya and some sunflowers engraved, and on it
It's
the words,
okay.
"Our sunflower forever in our hearts."
We will never hold her in our arms again on this earth, but we'll always hold her close in our hearts until we meet again.
Police did attend the funeral, and they took down the license plate numbers for all of the vehicles that were in the parking lot of the church, and they also recorded people as they were coming and going out of the church. This is pretty standard practice since killers will sometimes attend the funerals of their victims. And this video of the funeral does come back up later on in the case. After this, things sort of quieted down a little bit. They hadn't really heard much from the killer since that last phone call, but that would all change on Halloween night. Halloween 1995 has gone down in Abbotsford history as being one of the scariest they've ever experienced. The town of Abbotsford would usually have lots of kids running around from house to house trick-or-treating, but this Halloween was really quiet. By the time night fell, streets were deserted. No one wanted their kids out with a killer still on the loose. At around 9 p.m. that night, a 911 call came
Crazy.
in, and the voice was very familiar. It was the killer, and he was threatening to find another victim and do unspeakable things to
Crazy
her.
luck
And
right
he
now.
also again made mention of the bite mark on Tanya's right breast.
Just to let you know who I am. Tanya's right tasted really good.
And after listening and re-listening to the recording, the police believe that the killer was masturbating when he made this 911 call. And this constant mention of the bite mark on Tanya's breast was becoming the killer's calling card. He would mention it every time he spoke to police, and it was his way of letting them know that he was the real deal. The call was eventually traced to a payphone outside of a local pub called Gigi's Sports Bar, and police
Gigi?
finally found a witness. A person at the sports bar saw a car, a beige sedan, sitting outside of the phone booth, and the car drove off right before the police had arrived. So this was at least some sort of a lead. And thankfully, despite the killer's threats, there were no reported attacks on Halloween night, which likely had something to do with the fact that the streets were deserted and the residents were on extremely high alert. Investigators eventually made the decision to release the audio from the phone calls to the public to kind of reignite the investigation. But they did edit out any mention of the bite mark. They needed this information to stay between themselves and the killer. They held a press conference where they would show the composite sketch that Misty had helped them come up with while they played the audio recordings. And police provided a 1-800 number for people to call if they wanted to give up any leads or tips, or if they wanted to listen to the recordings again. But what they didn't tell the public was that they flagged any person who called the 1-800 number more than 3 times. Once they called more than 3 times, the caller would be added to a person of interest list. With the ego the killer seemed to have and the pleasure he took from this entire case, it was thought that he would potentially call the number just so he could hear himself making threats and creeping people out. The release of the phone calls sent this case into national news. The entire
Cass,
country was
watch
talking
again.
about the person now dubbed the Abbotsford Killer. One of the calls that police
Just
received was
crying.
from a composite artist named Robert Exter. Robert had actually worked with the FBI when the Unabomber case had first kicked off, and he had been following the Abbotsford Killer case since the news broke in the media. Robert told police that he had some concerns about the composite that police had been showing to the media. In his opinion, the balance to the face was off and likely was not accurate. He said that some of the features, more specifically the large forehead and the very wide set eyes, were not something typically seen in the average person. Robert ended up going to Abbotsford to create his own composite, and he worked with Misty to do this. And you can see that the proportions of the new composite do look more realistic. So on November 17th, the new drawing was released to the public, and on that same day, Misty and her family were placed in the witness protection program. The release of the new drawing did bring in a huge flood of new tips, but one name in particular was reported by 3 separate tipsters. A local man named George Evenden had been reported as being nearly identical to the new composite, and that wasn't all. George had a prior record and was suspected of trafficking drugs around the same location as the attacks had occurred. According to one of the tipsters, the day before the murder, George had been at a birthday party, and at this party there was a cake that had been made to look like a set of breasts, and George bit the nipple off of the cake, which I'll admit is a really weird coincidence. He also allegedly made comments that he would like to, quote, grab a couple of bitches off the street. And the most incriminating information was that George used a baseball bat in previous assaults. So before police had even heard about George, they had actually looked into some sexual assault cases that had happened in the area, just to see if maybe they could find a link between those cases and Tanya and Misty's case. And they ended up coming across 2 cases of assault that were currently still unsolved. So once police heard that George could be a potential suspect, they decided to put his photo in a lineup and show it to these 2 victims. And both of these women identified George as their attacker.
Away?
But surprisingly, Misty did not pick George out of the lineup. He was still brought in for questioning though, and he very adamantly denied having anything to do with the murder. And when police requested a DNA swab, George, without hesitation, consented. They couldn't really hold George on Misty and Tanya's case, but since the other 2 assault victims had picked him out of a lineup, he was held at the jail. They also had a forensic odontologist come in to compare the bite mark on Tanya's breast to an impression of George's teeth, which again, he consented to without any hesitation. Police were cautiously hopeful that they had finally found the killer, but in the end, George was ruled out by both the odontologist and the DNA analyst. He was not a match. And even more surprisingly, when George's DNA was compared against the DNA from the other 2 assault cases, he wasn't a match there either. George was a free man, but there had been serious damage to his reputation. The public knew that he had been a prime suspect, and they really thought that he was the Abbotsford killer. And now the police and the community had to come to terms with the fact that the real killer was still out there. And this is when the killer broke his 14-week-long silence, and he once again made contact. Except this time, he went way beyond just a phone call. On February 17th, 1996, a strange call came in the local radio station, Radio Max. The caller told the DJ to walk outside to the radio station parking lot and go check the Radio Max company car. At first, the DJ thought that the caller was giving him a heads up that maybe someone had backed into the Radio Max car and it had been damaged or something. So the DJ stops what he's doing and he walks outside to the parking lot and over to the Radio Max car. And right there on the hood of the car was Tanya Smith's headstone. And whoever put it there had written disturbing messages all over it. The messages included, "She was not the first, she won't be the last," "I'm still looking," "One day Misty," and "You won't find me." And remember how I mentioned earlier that Tanya's tombstone had a photo of her on it? Well, just in case people thought that anyone but the killer had done this, he also drew arrows pointing to Tanya's right breast with the words, "Yummy tit." And I can't even begin to imagine what Tanya's parents went through when they heard about this, and Misty and her family as well. The killer obviously hadn't forgotten about Misty, and now he's making open threats towards her. And somehow, again, no one saw anything. This man literally managed to dig up a 200-pound headstone and drive it to a radio station, unload it, which couldn't have been an easy task, and then put it on top of a car in a well-lit parking lot without being seen by anyone. How was he getting so lucky? No one could understand how this man was able to remain so elusive. The investigators ended up paying for an exact replica of Tanya's headstone, and they had a little ceremony and replaced it. And just 2 days after the headstone was stolen, another 911 call came in. This time, the killer was calling from a payphone at the Rotary Stadium near the running track, just 2 blocks away from the police station. And he just asked the operator if they had enjoyed the little gift that he left for them the other night.
911 emergency. Do you need police, fire, ambulance? How would you like my present I gave you guys? I'm sorry, sir. I can't hear you, sir. How would you like my present I gave you guys? I'm sorry. I can't hear you. Okay, sir. Just
By the time the call was traced to the Rotary Stadium running track, the killer was gone. But there was a woman there who had been running on the stadium track, and she saw the man
Crazy.
who had been using the payphone right before the
Seeing a
police
lot of
arrived.
shadow
And
aisles,
she
is
even
that
saw the car
becoming
he was
like
driving, a beige sedan car just like the one that
go-to?
was seen at GG Sports Bar. And she did get a
Holy
decent
cow.
look at the man, not enough to give a lot of detail, but enough to give a rough idea. She said he looked to be about 30 years old, he had reddish brown hair, and he was about 6 feet tall with a medium build. Robert Exter worked with the woman to create another composite sketch, and he also got a drawing of the car that the woman saw. And then just 2 days after that phone call, the killer did something really bizarre. At 10:30 p.m. the night
Really
of February
bizarre?
21st, the killer walked
So,
up to a house on a very
none of
dark
the other
street in
stuff he's
Abbotsford
done is
where
really
a
bizarre,
mother
but
and her
that-
children live. He stood
Now
outside
we're
of
to
the
the
woman's
really
house for
bizarre.
a bit, then he threw a package strapped to a wrench through the living room window, completely shattering it. The woman and her children were totally freaked out, but they knew not to touch the package. But they could see some writing on
Shadow
the
Quick
wrapping,
Striker?
and it read, "From the Abbey
What's
Killer,
it gonna
call
be, yes,
911."
please?
So they did just that and called
Oh,
911, and officers rushed over and took the package into
Oh.
evidence. And what
Oh,
they
did I
found would
elam them?
completely rock the entire
Oh,
investigation. Inside of the package, they found newspaper clippings of
I don't know
Tanya
why I
and Misty's
thought all the other
photos,
things were
and the
bizarre.
killer had written the words "lucky to be alive" on Misty's face. They also found clippings from 3 unsolved murders that occurred back in 1985. The newspaper clippings were from a 1989 Vancouver Sun article about the unsolved murders from back in 1985. Whoever did this had been holding on to those articles for like 6 years, and then they found a letter from the killer addressed to the police. The letter is kind of long, but there's
Oh,
a
this
lot
is
of
the
information
Zane
that
guy.
the killer packed into it, so I feel like it's important for me to include
he gotten
most
it
of
yet?
it. Also, I'm going to put the words on the screen while I read it. Keep in mind that I have typed it exactly the way the killer wrote it, grammatical errors and all. Hello, it's me. Yes sirree, Tanya's right nipple sure did taste good. She wasn't a bad lay either. It was me that phoned from the Rotary that night. You cops getting a little pissed off yet? Hard to catch someone who's smart. Not like some stupid crooks that are no minds. Here are a few more of my conquests. I told you it wasn't my first, and it won't be my last either. I don't stay with the same MO. I have done more after these ones also. Go figure out which ones. Look in BC, Alta, and a few in Washington State. How come you guys haven't clued into some of the incidents here in town the last couple of years? Borkin by McDonald's, teen who was attempted sex assault. I grabbed her breast and was about to gag her when she took off on me. Oriole Drive, I almost had that woman beat senseless and was about to rape her when a car came along. I sure don't need to be seen. How about right across from the hospital? Hey, that was the same bath that was used on Misty and Tanya. As soon as I saw it was an Indian, I said no way, could have AIDS. So I took her backpack, found $200 in it, and threw it atop the old brick store. Hey guys, I'm bad. I will strike again one day. I will not be caught. I will not move from Abbotsford. Bye guys. This is the last time you hear from me. Till next time. So there is a lot to unpack in this letter.
Yes.
First of all, police now fully believe that Tanya and Misty had not been the killer's first victims. He had mentioned this to police in previous phone calls, but they didn't
Yes,
know
there's a lot
if this
to
was
unpack
just
here.
for dramatic effect or if this was the truth. The Borkin case that he mentioned
did.
happened right
Finally
outside of
unlocked it.
McDonald's actually involved a 12-year-old girl. The girl was just innocently sitting in front of the McDonald's when a man walked up behind her, groped her breast, and then attempted to pull her off to abduct her. But the girl fought back and she managed to get away, and the man quickly fled the scene. She didn't get a good look at the man's face, but she did say that his arms were covered in freckles and red hair, and also that he had an anchor tattoo on his forearm. The next victim that he mentioned was a woman who was attacked on Oriole Drive. This woman suffered with mental health issues, and she was actually living at an outpatient treatment center. One night she was just enjoying a walk when suddenly someone came up behind her and hit her over the head, causing her to lose consciousness. When she finally came to, she was being dragged off by her feet. But just then, a car started coming down the street, and the headlights freaked the attacker out, and he took off. And then there's the woman who he said he beat with the same baseball bat as he had Tanya and Misty. This woman had been attacked
why is
just
this
2
Scion so
months
big?
before the murder of Tanya. She had been out at a bar that night, but she had a
Why is
fight
this
with her
Scion so
boyfriend,
tall?
so she just decided to leave. She started walking down the sidewalk, and that's all she could remember.
Oh,
A
'cause he was
passerby
the
spotted her
solo
lying on the
leveling
ground
guy.
and took her to the hospital. And she was beaten so severely that a piece of her skull had penetrated her brain. She definitely would have died from her injuries if she hadn't been found when she was. Her purse was later found on the
this
roof
guy,
of a store,
man.
and $225 was missing, just like the killer said in the letter. And the mention of the 3 unsolved murders from 1985 had made them wonder if they were actually dealing with a serial killer. This entire investigation had obviously become a game to the killer, and he was loving every minute of it. And he really didn't think he would ever be caught, but his reign of terror was about to end, and it would be his own ego that would be his downfall. So, like I said, investigators processed the package and the letter inside and out. They searched every inch of that thing for any evidence, and it paid off because they finally managed to find one single fingerprint, and not a partial print either, a full print. The fingerprint finding was huge because now they could compare the print to the ones in their database, and they could finally have their man. But unfortunately, when they searched the Canadian database, there was no hit. So then they tried the American database. The killer had mentioned that he had committed some crimes in Washington State, so maybe he'd have a record in the US, but still nothing. Investigators couldn't believe that their killer had no prior record. The profilers had been certain that this person they were dealing with was a career criminal. So they decided to just compile all of this new information, including a drawing of the anchor tattoo that the 12-year-old victim had mentioned, and a drawing of the beige sedan that the woman at the track had seen. They just put all of this information onto a poster and they released it to the media. They also hired a professional to clean up the background noise from the audio recordings of the phone calls, and they also announced that there was now a $40,000 reward to anyone who gave any tips that led to the arrest of the killer. And just 3 hours after the release of this new information and audio, they got the call that they had been waiting for. A woman called the tip line claiming that she was positive that she recognized the voice of the killer. It was her own son, 31-year-old Terry Driver. She said that she and some of Terry's other family members had listened to the recordings on the playback line, and they knew without a doubt that the voice belonged to Terry. She also said that Terry had a car that looked very similar to the one in the sketch. He also frequently fished at Vetter Canal, and he lived just a few blocks over from the Rotary Stadium where one of the 911 calls had been made. And Terry had been acting a little strange over the last few months. Not long after Tanya's murder, he and his brother had gone into a fight, and Terry became very loud and aggressive, and he yelled at his brother, quote, "Don't fuck with me. You don't know me anymore.
He has the
You don't know what
Noxus
I'm
10.
capable of," which really creeped the family out. They didn't know what he meant by that. And then she told them that Terry had attended Tanya Smith's funeral. Terry didn't know Tanya at all, so what reason could he possibly have to go to her funeral? So this was a major red flag. But the only issue was that Terry's mom said he didn't look anything like the composite sketch. Despite this,
Okay,
though,
I'll take a
police
second.
immediately go over to Terry's home to speak with him. And his mother was right. He really didn't look anything like the drawing. Terry had freckles and a mustache with a small beard, and his face wasn't nearly as thin as the sketch. And he had red hair that was slightly thinning, but not as much as Misty had described. And remember the red arm hair that the 12-year-old victim reported? So even though Terry looks very different from the composite sketch, police immediately recognize his voice. They had been listening to the killer's voice for months now, and it was burned into their brains, and they knew that this was it. Misty's recollection of what the killer looked like had most likely just been off, considering how severe her head injuries were and the fact that it was so dark outside. Also, it isn't unusual for an eyewitness to be way off on their memory of a suspect. Terry acted kind of nervous, but he didn't really show much emotion when he was being questioned, and he flat out refused to submit a DNA sample or his fingerprint. Up until now, every person the police interviewed was very eager to submit DNA and be ruled out as a suspect. So when Terry was so adamant about not submitting his DNA, the police were and then he ended the interview and told police that he would be getting a lawyer. So police left Terry's home, but they started digging more into his life. They learned that Terry was born on January 27th, 1965, and he was one of 4 children, and his father had been a Vancouver police officer. Terry had been born with brain damage, and he was eventually diagnosed with Tourette syndrome and ADHD.
Like a little poro spot, and they got little snackies on the
He was
side.
eventually placed in a care home at the age of 5 because his parents couldn't handle him. During this time in the care home, it said that Terry started hurting both people and animals.
Yeah,
I don't have any specific details on this, but it just seems like Terry was a very troubled and disturbed kid. While Terry was away at this care home, his parents divorced. And at the age of 11, Terry was taken out of the care home, or maybe he was kicked out. I don't really know. I just know that he left and he ended up living with his father. During his teens, Terry was bullied and
I don't care about him. He
mostly
sucks.
about.
So we're listening to somebody else. Hey, I mean, augments earlier this game, I'm not too mad about.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel.
Oh my
I hope you're having a
god.
great week. If you are new here, please consider subscribing.
Who would have thought an early Aphelios
So today
for
we're
me?
talking about a woman named Victoria Nasarova. And Victoria is an absolutely
Yeah, I don't care
bizarre,
about him.
downright horrible person who is motivated by one thing and one
I don't
thing
care
only,
about him.
and that is money.
Come on now.
A fugitive
He
accused
murdered
of luring
Beaches.
men and poisoning women to steal their jewelry, cash, and even identity. Victoria Nasryova adds attempted murder
Freaky
to
Terry.
her already long list of charges.
You might recognize Victoria because she has been seen in the news recently, because
I don't.
even though her crimes took place back in 2014, 2016, she was actually only just sentenced in April of this year, 2023. Victoria is originally from Russia, but she moved to the United States back in 2015 in order to escape some very serious charges. And most of the coverage of this case on YouTube, at least, has been from news channels like ABC, CBS, and most of their coverage is about the doppelganger and the cheesecake. And if you are familiar with this case, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you have no clue what I'm talking about, then just get ready to listen to a pretty wild story.
Oh, I'm
So yeah,
excited.
let's just go ahead and jump in. But first, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Green Chef. Green Chef is a certified organic company that offers balanced and delicious meals shipped right to your door. You know those nights when you just can't figure out
Ooh,
what you're
I
gonna
kinda-
cook, and it's
No
just
scunt, no
getting
pivot for
later
this
and
game,
later
though.
into the evening,
I tried the
and
hefty
your
rolls
kids are
thing and it
just
kinda didn't do much for
repeatedly
me.
asking
Let's
you
try
what's for
this.
dinner, and you eventually just run out of time, so you end up just eating whatever you have lying around. My personal go-to is cereal, typically on those nights. Well, my family has a
I just
term
can't
for
put
this.
in,
We call it catch a can, which literally means
Window.
just catch what you can, like whatever you can find to eat. a
Unless I wanna keep
sandwich,
him there the
chicken
entire
nuggets,
game.
Cereal. Green Chef has definitely helped to cut down on catch a
But-
can nights for my family because I don't have to do any of the grocery shopping
Go to
or
Bruce and
spend time
Broker.
trying to
I
figure
guess
out
maybe
what
I
I'm
don't
going to
put in
make, which is
Kuboku.
probably the hardest part for me. The food is quick and easy to prepare, typically only taking about 30 minutes. The meal that I made last night was the creamy paprika shrimp
just keep
with green
window
beans
in.
and
Like, this
cabbage
board
slaw,
works
and it was
perfectly for
absolutely
no scout, no
delicious and
pivot.
super simple to cook. Only took me about 20 minutes from start to finish. Each kit contains a variety of organic ingredients that are sent
Not
bagged
sponsored,
up
but could be
together
sponsored.
and already measured out in this video. And now let's jump into the case. On October 5th, 2014, a woman named Nadia Ford was frantically calling her mother, 54-year-old Alla Alasinko, with no luck. Nadia had moved to Brooklyn, New York from her hometown of Krasnodar, Russia in 2007 for college, but her mother Alla had remained
Crazy.
in Krasnodar, living there alone in her little apartment. Krasnodar is located very
Bro,
close
they used to
to
like
the
my
Black
life.
Sea, and it's about 800 miles from Moscow. Despite now living across the world from one another, Nadia and Alla remained extremely close. And they spoke on the phone every day without fail, so when Nadia couldn't get a hold of her mother on October 5th, 2014, she immediately knew that something just wasn't right. And she already had a pretty good idea of what could have possibly
Oh,
happened
I
to
can't
her.
take him
Alla
off
had a next-door
because
neighbor,
we're-
a woman
we're
in
no
her late
scouting, no
30s who
pivoting.
had recently befriended her.
Pivot!
And Alla, being a very
Pivot!
sweet, friendly, trusting person,
These beaches
welcomed
locked
this
and
neighbor
loaded.
into her life with open arms. Her new friend's name was Victoria Nasirova. And unknown to
No
Alla
pivot!
or Nadia, Victoria was a very
No
dangerous
pivot!
woman. And over time, Victoria and Alla became best friends. They were together pretty much all the time. Not long before Victoria and Alla became friends, Alla had come into a large amount of money. She had recently sold a home that had belonged to her late parents, and she got what equates to about $51,000 from the sale of the home. In addition to that, Alla had a little nest egg of her own that she had built up over the years, and she kept all of this money hidden in her apartment. One day, Alla called Nadia to tell her that Victoria was planning a trip to New York soon, and she would be delivering some valuables to her. She was supposed to bring Nadia 2 mink fur coats and $6,000 in cash. So Alla gives Victoria all of these valuable possessions under the assumption that she will be leaving very soon for New York to deliver these things to her daughter. But the days go by and Victoria still hasn't left. And as time passes and Victoria still has not left for this trip, Alla starts to suspect that Victoria has no intentions of actually going to New York. So Alla calls
Mundo
Nadia
too?
to tell her what's going on,
Like as an
and that she's
early
starting to
Mundo,
get a little
not
worried
that
that
he's Mundo
Victoria's
two,
not
he is
going
Mundo
on this
one.
New York trip.
There's
And
a
if that's the
pre-cost,
case,
no
then
two,
Alla wants her
but two
valuables
as in,
back.
like,
On October
as
4th,
well.
Alla calls Nadia to tell her that she spoke to Victoria about everything and she had agreed to come by to return the money and the 2 mink coats. But by the next day, when Nadia called her mom for their daily chat, she didn't answer. This was totally out of the norm for Alla. In the last 8 years that Nadia had been living in New York, her mother had always answered the phone when she called. So Nadia spent pretty much that entire day just repeatedly calling her mother with no luck. She actually estimates that she called at least 100 times, and when the day passed with no answer and no call back, Nadia knew something was seriously wrong. So she decides to reach out to Victoria. She knew that she and her mom had plans to meet up, and so she knew that she could possibly be the last person to have seen her. And when Nadia called Victoria, she actually did pick up, and Nadia just asks, "Where's my mom?" Victoria tells her that she had went over to Alla's the day before and they had had tea together, and then she had returned home. Then she said after that Alla left to go on a trip
Also,
with some
happy
friends,
2 weeks of
and that
streaming
her
every single
phone
day.
probably just
Only
died
50
while she
more
was
weeks
away.
to
And by the end
go.
of that conversation,
Woo!
Nadia was even more worried about Alla, and
Give
she
me
didn't
that.
believe anything Victoria had told her. So the next day, while Nadia is at work, she decided to do some digging. She got online to look at her mother's cell phone call log to see if she could find anything that stood out. And that's when she sees that the last person that her mother spoke to before she went dark was Victoria Nasirova. In Nadia's mind, this was proof that Victoria knew much more than she was letting on. So she dropped everything, she packed a bag, and she headed straight for the airport and boarded a plane to Russia. Once she landed, she called the Russian police to report that her mother was missing and to tip them off that Victoria might have something to do with it. So while police are on their way, Nadia calls Victoria and tells her to come outside and meet her in front of the
Well, what
apartment
do
building.
I
And
pick?
as soon as Victoria walked out of the building, Nadia grabs her and she demands to know where her mother is. Victoria just started screaming that Alla is alive, and she just denied having anything to do with her disappearance. Then she manages
know,
to get
it
away
just
from
makes no
Nadia, and she
sense in
just
my brain.
runs back into the building, up the stairs, and into her apartment where she locks herself inside. Police show up and they go in and they question Victoria about Alla's disappearance, which at this point Alla had been missing for 3
through the
days.
challenge.
No word from her and no activity on her cell phone. But
Doing
Victoria was
the,
able to charm her way out of it, and after
hard
questioning
dance.
her for a while, the police left with no answers. So Nadia goes into Alla's apartment and she starts kind of snooping around, and she realizes that someone has taken pretty much everything of value from that apartment. Money, jewelry, family heirlooms, everything. As I mentioned earlier, Alla had come into some money recently from the sale of her parents' home, and she kept all of this money hidden under a dresser behind some wooden boards. So to access this money, you would have to get down on the floor and pull these slats of wood from the bottom of this dresser, so you would have to know where to look. It was not an obvious hiding place. Only the people closest to Alla would have known about
So
this.
close.
Her children, and apparently
I
her
want to hit
best
my bar
friend
dance.
Victoria
That's so
Nasirova,
lame.
because when Nadia pulled back those wooden slats, she discovered
Someone
that
has
all of the
subbed to
money
have them,
was
I guess
gone.
not.
She also
Someone-
noticed that the apartment
was
seemed
subbed
to
who
have
had
been
that as
scrubbed
an emo, I guess
completely
not.
clean.
The bar
Alla had a
dance?
stainless steel refrigerator, and I'm sure you know that, whenever you touch those, you leave fingerprints. I mean, they're really hard to keep clean. There were absolutely no prints anywhere on this refrigerator. The entire apartment looked like it had been scrubbed down. Nadia would end up spending 6 months in Russia in an attempt to find out what happened to her mother. She took a leave from her job back in New York, and she was not giving up until she had answers. Nadia was constantly going down to the police station
I hope
and
he
just
does this
begging
dance.
for answers, pushing them
Hope
to
he
help
wins just
more
like
with
he
the
did the dance
case,
with them.
and she eventually became known to the police as the crazy American daughter. Nothing seemed to be moving in her mother's case, no matter how hard she pushed. So Nadia started her own investigation. She started thinking, what if Victoria drove Alla out of Krasnodar? Maybe one of the traffic cameras picked something up. According to Nadia, if you have money in Russia, you can buy pretty much anything. And so she manages to get her hands on some of the footage from the traffic cameras that lead out of the city. And that's when she finds something truly shocking. She sees images of a woman driving a car, and in the passenger seat there appears to be another woman slumped over, seemingly unconscious or no longer alive. Even though these images are pretty blurry, Nadia knows that the woman in the passenger seat is her mother. And to top it all off, the date on that footage was October 5th, 2014, the exact day that Alla went missing. Nadia immediately goes to the police to show them what she's found, but to her surprise, the police said they already had that footage in their possession, and they had also found out that the license plate of the car in the footage belonged to a rental car taken out in Victoria's name. They had been doing an investigation into Victoria all along. They end up bringing Victoria in for some more questioning and to take a lie detector test. And during the test, they asked her questions specifically about the rental car, if she was alone when she was driving it. They also asked her general questions about Ala and her disappearance. And then after the test was over, the investigators made the mistake of letting Victoria leave the station while they processed the results. And as soon as she walked out of that station, she went on the run. She got a fake passport and headed to Moscow, and then from there she flew to Mexico. Victoria was now officially an international fugitive. A red notice was issued, and she was also added to the Interpol
See, this is
list
the kind of
wanted
stuff that I
for
need.
murder. Interpol
We're playing
is the
TFT,
International
listening to a
Criminal
YouTube
Police
video, and I have to
Organization.
pee.
It allows
Like, that's
authorities
exactly
from
what I need in
different
this
areas
life.
all over the world to share information about international fugitives. Victoria failed every single question that she took on the polygraph, by the way. Not that those tests are really reliable, but in this case, it was, allegedly. And as if finding out that Victoria has escaped wasn't bad enough, Nadia finds out that one of the officers who was supposedly working the case had started having an affair with Victoria, and he was deliberately stalling any progress in the case in order to protect her. We haven't really touched on this, but Victoria has a way of charming men. She definitely knows how to use her sexuality to her advantage. She's also been described as voluptuous and sexy, so yeah, apparently a lot of men found her pretty irresistible, and she knew how to manipulate them into doing whatever she wanted. So Nadia remained in Krasnodar, still searching for any sign of Ala, but then in April of 2015, so 6 months after she first arrived, she got the news that she had been dreading. About a 3-hour drive outside of Krasnodar in a wooded area, human remains were discovered and believed to be that of Ala. The remains were pretty much just charred bones, and it was obvious that someone had burned the body in an attempt to destroy it. Nadia went down to identify the remains, and she was only able to do so by looking at the teeth. That was pretty much the only recognizable trait. And it turns out that Ala's body had been found not even 1 mile outside of the city of Armavir, which is the city where Victoria Nasirova grew up. And now that Ala had been found, Nadia did return home to Brooklyn with a huge hole in her heart. And after weeks of serious mourning and not leaving her home, Nadia decided to log into Facebook, and just out of curiosity, she typed the name Victoria Nasirova into the search bar. And there she was, right there on the screen, posting selfie after selfie, seemingly living a glamorous life, traveling, wearing furs and diamonds, giving off the air of a celebrity or an influencer. She was also checking into all of these different places on Facebook. You know the check-in feature on Facebook where you can, check in at different locations like Starbucks or something, and it'll say like Summer Sanchez is at Starbucks in Manhattan, New York. Yeah, she was doing that, and most of her check-ins were clustered within a specific area of New York. So now Nadia realizes that Victoria is likely now living in New York where she lives. So she contacts immigration officers to let them know that Victoria is on the Interpol list and she's likely living in New York. And they do look into this, but they have no luck tracking her down. So then she hires a private investigator named Herman Weisberg, and this decision turned the entire case around. Herman had been a New York police officer for over 20 years, and after he retired, he started his own PI firm. And let me just tell you, the way he found Victoria, who was literally in a city of millions and millions of people, is just crazy. So Herman begins his investigation by scrolling through all of Victoria's Facebook posts, and he finds one selfie in particular that catches his attention. In this selfie, Victoria is sitting in a car, and she is wearing mirrored sunglasses, so you can clearly see everything that's being reflected in them. Herman can make out the dashboard layout in the car, which looks pretty unique, but what really catches his attention is the gray stitching on the black leather seats. With the dashboard layout and the gray stitching literally his only leads at this point, Herman takes a trip to the parking lot of a train station. This parking lot is huge, and there are always hundreds and hundreds of cars parked there at any given time, so he figured he'd take a little look around and see if he can find any of these features in any of the cars that are sitting in the lot. And somehow he manages to find a car that has both the stitching and the same dashboard layout as the one in the selfie. The car turned out to be a Chrysler 300. Now, this was not the exact car that Victoria was sitting in that selfie, of course, but he at least now knows the make and model. So, like I said, Victoria was checking into all these different locations around New York. Well, Herman noticed that most of her Facebook check-ins were scattered around Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn. Sheepshead Bay is a neighborhood in Brooklyn with a high population of Russian-American residents. So Herman figures they should probably start their
I've
search
been
there.
completely
He
muted
and
this
some of
entire
his
time.
team
Whoopsie
go
daisy.
driving all around the neighborhood, and they take down the license plate
Whoopsie
numbers of
daisy.
every single Chrysler 300 that they see, and they start running plates. And they end up finding one of the Chryslers was registered to a man.
Oh my
with a Russian
gosh.
sounding name. So Herman gets the address
Dude,
for the
I
apartment
wish
building that
I had
belongs
a
to this
freaking,
person, and he heads over,
standing
and
desk.
that's when he notices something
If we
familiar.
top
He
4, I'm gonna
notices
stand
in
up and
yet
do that
another
dance.
Facebook
Full
selfie
screen.
where again Victoria is wearing mirrored sunglasses. The reflection shows the outside of an apartment building with a telephone pole and 2 manhole covers right next to each other. The address that was associated with that Chrysler had a telephone pole and 2 manhole covers right in front of it, exactly like the image in Victoria's sunglasses.
Sounds
so
like
Herman
a bunch
assumes that
of-
Victoria is
sounds
likely in
like
a
a bunch
relationship
of-
with the owner of the Chrysler and potentially living with him in that apartment. And he was 100% right. Victoria was living in that apartment, which was only a few blocks away from Nadia's home. The entire time that Nadia had been searching for her mother's killer, she had been living in the same neighborhood. They had probably even crossed paths at some point. And it didn't take Herman long to realize that once Victoria had fled Russia, she landed in New York and started wreaking havoc there. Her life of crime did not stop. So most of Victoria Nasarova's life leading up to her crimes is a bit of a mystery. We know she was born on December 15th, 1975 in the city of Amovir in Russia. And of course we know that she fled to the United States after killing Allah, allegedly, and then she made her way to New York. So when Victoria arrived in New York, she began working as an escort where she advertised herself as a dominatrix. This is a person who takes on the dominant role in BDSM activities. BDSM is an acronym for bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, and sadism and masochism. Some of the activities involve bondage, role-playing, causing physical pain, and humiliation. And Victoria was admittedly really into the pain and humiliation part of her job. She herself has said that she got into that line of work as a dominatrix because she hated men and she wanted to humiliate them. And during these sessions, she would often assume the role as the man, and the man would pretend to be the woman, and she would humiliate them and torment them as much as they were willing to take. A lot of her clients were married or they were in very notable positions in society, according to Victoria, and she said that they came to her because they weren't able to get what they really wanted from their partners. BDSM is actually pretty common, I think, and people should be able to express themselves in the bedroom however they want to, as long as their partner or partners are totally willing and consenting. Which was the case for Victoria's clients. They were literally paying her for these services. However, Victoria started doing some things that her clients did not consent to and were absolutely not okay with. On at least a few occasions, Victoria slipped something into either the food or drinks of her clients, fed it to them without their knowledge, and then stole thousands of dollars in money and valuables from them while they were unconscious. And this was not a situation where the victim was, just in a heavy sleep for a few hours. No, these men were near death. Investigators believe that the majority of Victoria's victims wouldn't want to come forward about this, likely out of embarrassment, or maybe they were worried that their spouses would find out, and that's why it's thought that Victoria has many more victims out there. So in addition to advertising herself on the escort site, Victoria also had a profile on a Russian dating website, and she would make connections with various men around New York. And one day she catches the eye of a man named Ruben. Ruben runs a dry cleaning service in New York, and he was single and looking for companionship. And when he sees Victoria's profile, he decides to connect with her, and the two begin texting back and forth. Victoria mentions that she is a really good cook, which was a huge bonus for Ruben. So he's talking to this beautiful Russian woman, plus she's a great cook, so he thinks he's hit the jackpot. Eventually, Victoria invites Ruben to come over to her apartment and have dinner with her. She says she's going to cook for him, and Ruben happily agrees. He would later say that he did assume that they would also be hooking up that night, so he was pretty excited about this date. So as soon as he arrives at Victoria's place, she immediately starts insisting that Ruben eat the dinner that she prepared for him, which was fish and vegetables. She was very pushy about it. So Ruben sits down to eat this meal that she had made for him, and he takes one bite of fish and immediately loses consciousness. Victoria had obviously laced the fish with something, and once Ruben was out, Victoria left him there and went on a shopping spree with his money. She took $600 in cash that he had, and she also took his American Express card and spent $2,400. By the next day, Ruben was still in and out of consciousness, but Victoria needed him out of the apartment. So she loads him up and she takes him down to his dry cleaning
So why don't
business,
all of them
and
make
she
a weird
helps
noise
him
when they
walk inside
upgrade?
and proceeds to
I
tell his
know.
workers, which included his sister, that he had
It
drank
just all depends
multiple
on the
bottles
voice
of
line.
wine, and
Let's
she
hear
thought he
what
might have taken
Shin's
pills
will
as
be.
well, and that's why he was so out of it. One of the employees started filming, so there is actual footage of Victoria saying all of this. Meanwhile, Ruben can't defend himself or tell anyone that it's not true because he's still totally out of it. There is also footage of Ruben being carried out of his dry cleaning business on a stretcher because they finally had to call 911 to get him some help. But by the time the ambulance arrived, Victoria had vanished. But not before stealing some money from a cash register that she
Yeah,
found
can't really
down
hear
in the basement,
any of that.
and also
Nothing really
Ruben's
happened.
watch. Ruben was in the hospital for about a week recovering from whatever Victoria had done to him, and he was close to death, but thankfully he did survive. And not long after this, Victoria struck again, but this time her motive was much more sinister than just monetary gain. Olga Svik was a Ukrainian immigrant living in New York. She had come to the U.S. in 2014 under political asylum during the Crimean crisis. She had a friend already living in New York named Marina who helped her get settled and to find a place to stay, and Olga ended up moving in with Marina's uncle.
Amazing self-control there. I'm glad that you noticed that because it took everything in me not to keep re-rolling.
She actually had her own space upstairs, and over the course
I was like,
of the next
ooh.
couple of years, Olga applied
Ooh,
for
I'm in a
and
good
was
spin
granted
cycle.
something
Ooh,
called
affiliate
an
spin cycle.
employment
Ooh.
authorization. This meant that she was legally able to work
No.
in America, and she was also issued an employment authorization card so that she could prove her status anytime she needed to. The card had a photo of Olga on it, along with her address and other pieces of personal information. And by 2016, Olga had found her calling in the beauty industry, working as an eyelash specialist, and she set up a station in a salon in the Forest Hills area of Queens doing lash
See
extensions.
this right
and
here?
one of Olga's clients
This?
was none other than Victoria
Damn it.
Nazarova. Victoria
Gotcha.
had always struck Olga as a little
I don't even-
pushy. She
I
was
don't
sort
even
of
like
a
that.
demanding client,
Now
but
this.
Olga was always kind to her.
This.
And when Victoria would come
Now
in for her
this.
services, she would talk to her about this and that. But there was one thing that Olga couldn't help but notice. There was a very obvious resemblance between herself and Victoria. They looked a lot alike. They had the same skin tone, the same dark hair. They were also close in age, and they had similar accents. And another thing Olga found strange was that Victoria was traveling all the way from Brooklyn to Queens to have her eyelashes done regularly. Getting from one point to another in New York isn't always an easy task, and Olga felt like going from Brooklyn to Queens is quite the journey to make for eyelashes when there
Gotta
were
get to that
lots of other
impossible lift.
technicians in Brooklyn. Victoria was also constantly asking
We
Olga
gotta get
to
that
hang
for
out
3-star.
outside of the salon. She was trying really hard to
Gotta
be
get
her
beefy
friend.
boy.
But Olga really
Duh.
didn't have any interest in pursuing anything other than a professional relationship with Victoria, so she was constantly turning her down. So one day while Victoria was having her lashes done, she tells Olga that she was happy because she was getting ready to get her green card soon. And this conversation led Olga to tell Victoria that she had been issued her employment authorization card. And you've probably already worked this out, but Victoria was not getting ready to get her green card. She just said that to get Olga to open up about her status so that she could kill her and then steal her identity. She had likely seen Olga's services advertised and saw a photo of her, realized they looked a lot alike, and that's probably why she started going to Olga's salon for her services. She wanted to befriend her and earn her trust and manipulate her the same way she had Alla back in Russia. But the problem
That
was
was some
Olga
tea
didn't
right
want to
there.
be her friend, so she had to come up with another plan to get her
Yeah,
alone.
cry some more,
So Victoria
abuelo.
goes to the salon in August for her usual
Abuelo.
appointment. But then later that week on August
Sheesh.
28, 2016,
Oh, okay, well,
she
you're
calls
kind.
Olga in a panic. She says that she's getting ready to go out of town and she needed an emergency eyelash repair, and she asked if she could come to Olga's home for her to do this. This was the weekend and Olga was not working. She was at home. Olga feels super uncomfortable about this and she asked her to meet her at the salon instead, but Victoria just kept insisting that she needed it done right then and it would be faster if she just went to Olga's house. After a lot of pressure, Olga finally relents and she says, okay, you can just come here and I'll fix it. So Victoria arrives at Olga's home and she goes upstairs to her room and Olga fixes the eyelashes. And to repay Olga for helping her out last minute, Victoria pulls out a clear plastic to-go container that has 3 small slices.
That's what I'm talking about.
Victoria tells Olga, you have to try this cheesecake. It's from this famous bakery. It's the best cheesecake in New York. Then Victoria takes 2 of the small slices for herself and she eats them. And then she insists that Olga eats her slice right then. So Olga starts eating the cheesecake and she's instantly hit with severe nausea and dizziness, and then she loses consciousness. Victoria had laced the cheesecake with a deadly dose of a drug called phenazepam. Phenazepam is a benzodiazepine that suppresses the central nervous system. It's typically used for people with anxiety and for people who have epilepsy.
If I could have some
it's
blue
produced in
and
Russia and it's not even legal in the United States. So once Olga was out and presumably dying, Victoria went through her things and took anything of value, including some money Olga had saved up, and most importantly, she took her passport and employment authorization card. Victoria knew the authorities were on her trail in Alla's murder case, and she desperately needed to become someone else. And she thought she found the perfect person in Olga. They had a lot of physical similarities, and best of all, Olga was in the United States legally and had all of the documentation to prove it. Olga remembers waking up at one point hours later to Victoria bringing her chicken soup. She says that she doesn't remember, but she thinks that she must have eaten some of the soup because she lost consciousness again right after that. So, of course, it is thought that the soup was also poisoned. Then, once Victoria thought that she had finally given Olga enough phenazepam to kill her, she changed her out of her sweats and into some sexy lingerie. Then she threw phenazepam all around the room
their dances
to
so
make it
well.
look like Olga had
I don't know why
taken her
Mundo's
own
not doing
life.
anything.
Then,
Usually he
just
has
for
like
good
his
measure,
chest just
before
going
she
boom,
left, she turned the heat up full blast, even though it was August and already very
Why aren't you
hot
spawning
outside.
yourself,
It was
bro?
later discovered that the effects of phenazepam on the human body are worsened if the person is exposed
Spawn
to extreme
yourself.
heat. And so Olga was just left in her room to die. Then 2
What?
days later,
Where's
her friend
the-
came by and discovered that she was nearly
Where's
lifeless
the-
on the bed
I'm
and rushed her to
confused.
the hospital.
When I'm
The
looking at
doctors
Bard,
did
I'm
tell Olga
confused.
that if she wouldn't have been found when she was, she probably would not have made it. Olga is alive,
that his
but she's still
face?
in and out of consciousness. At one point, she did slip into a coma. She's also hallucinating. She's still extremely ill.
Where's the
doctors
face?
don't know what's wrong with her, and she can't remember much.
His
at this
face
point,
is
so
just
they're
that
just doing all
small?
kind of tests,
It's just-
but everything was negative. After several days in 2 different
It's a mask,
hospitals,
though?
Olga was
I hope
finally
so.
discharged, but with no solid answers as to what had happened to her. Her sister Irina, who was still living in Ukraine at the time, had been notified that Olga had been in the hospital very sick with an unknown illness, and so she had flown to New York to take care of her sister. And when Irina entered Olga's bedroom and started looking around, she discovered that Olga's documents, including her employment authorization card, were all gone. And then Irina finds about 30 white pills scattered on the ground near the bed. And at this point, Olga is starting to get
Alright,
little
we
glimpses
gotta go.
of her memory
We
back.
gotta go
And the
8
last
now.
person she remembers being in her room was Victoria Nasirova. They know that there is something really sketchy
We gotta go
going
8
on,
now.
and Victoria is responsible. They gather up the pills and they call the police. So police arrive and they tell them all about the cheesecake, the pills, the fact that Olga had just
I like
been
it.
released
I'm
from
at
the
an
hospital
even
from a mysterious
with
illness,
this.
and they tell them that Victoria was the person responsible. And as police start looking around, they actually found the
Nocho, this is what you
cheesecake
get for
container in
stealing
the
my
trash can. I
Wukong
honestly
with
don't
a
know
rod
how Victoria
earlier.
remained free for so long because she seems to make a lot of mistakes. The cheesecake container was
Was it a
tested,
rod?
and it was discovered that
It might have been
phenazepam
Wukong
was
with
present.
blue.
The theory was put forth that Victoria had tried to kill
Either
Olga
way,
by
that's what
staging
you
a
get.
deliberate overdose, and then she planned to become Olga's fic. So while police are trying to track Victoria down to question her, Herman, the private investigator that Nadia had hired months ago, is finally closing in on Victoria's exact location. And in March of 2017, Victoria was finally arrested in front of her apartment building. And once she was arrested, the police did also question her boyfriend, the man who owned the Chrysler 300,
Well,
and he
all
told
of these are
police that he
poopy.
was actually one of Victoria's victims as well.
I mean,
She
I'll
had
just
stolen
buy for the
valuables
5
and money
bucks.
from him, but much worse than that, he said
though
that
those all
Victoria
smell.
killed his beagle. He claims that Victoria was really jealous of this dog, so she killed him on his birthday. I don't know the details, and I don't want to know the details, but this just shows you what an absolutely evil person Victoria is. She cares about literally no one but herself. Olga's documents were found in Victoria's apartment, and her DNA was also found on the cheesecake container as well. Victoria pretty much denied everything, and she remained in prison at Rikers Island awaiting trial for a while due to delays from the pandemic.
Really, the only reason why this is working is because there's nobody who's a Yordle abuser.
My mom in the grave, introducing Julian for life.
In an interview with 48 Hours from Jail, Nasriova denied trying to poison her friend.
Я знаю о ком идет речь, я знаю эту девушку. I know who you mean.
I know this young woman. I can tell you that.
Я ее не
I did not force her to eat it. Indicted Tuesday, the Queens District Attorney says Nasriova served her friend a poisoned cheesecake in Forest Hills
Hi, Beach.
back in 2016.
Oh, top
And
4.
before passing out, the woman's last memory is of seeing the defendant sitting beside her inside her home.
After this part, I don't.
Wait, hold on. I want to wait for him to dance again.
And even though this trial
I need him to
didn't
dance
have
again.
anything to do with Victoria's crimes from back in Russia with Allah, Nadia was still sitting in that courtroom every day. Lots of different witnesses were called, including
I have to be
Olga,
strategic
of
about
course,
this.
And when she got on the
I'm
stand to tell
gonna
her story,
wait for it to go
Victoria just stared at
to
her
be
and smiled.
on the
She was just
dragon,
so cocky
and
for
then
the
I'm gonna
whole
buy
thing,
down
like,
to
she really
8
believed
so
that
that it doesn't
somehow
pull
she would be
anybody.
found not guilty.
I'm gonna stay
but
7.
she was found guilty of attempted
It's over
murder,
there.
assault, and larceny, and she was sentenced to 21 years in prison.
I'm gonna put him right
she did get a
here
few years taken
so
off
that I
for
can
time
get-
served,
I can really
so
see,
it's
like, how
thought that she'll
it's
spend
dancing.
about 15 years in prison. But this is totally separate from the murder charges that she's still wanted for in Russia. There isn't an extradition agreement in place between the United States and Russia, so what will likely happen is Victoria will serve her 15 years here in America, and then when she's released, she will be deported, where she will likely be tried for murder in a Russian court.
Very good.
And the time that she's been serving at Rikers Island has been a pretty rough. $25,000.
I hit that.
I
I
definitely
hit that
expect
so
to hear
hard.
more about this case in the
Hit a
coming
little.
years. Everyone keeps referring to it as a
Wait, hold
made-for-TV
on.
crime, so I'm assuming there are going to
Hit that beach.
by TV. And as always, I appreciate each and every one of you for watching, and I will see you next time. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you've all had a great week. If you are new here, please consider subscribing if you end up liking this video. So today we are going all the way
Like,
back
what are
to
these?
19th
What are these
century
items that
France
I'm
to talk
getting?
about the French maid massacres.
Like,
and I think that one of my subscribers requested this one a while
What if I
back,
make him
so
super
thank you to
beefy?
whoever requested this one. It is crazy.
So he never
and
dies.
A truly creepy case. So back in 19th century France, most young women who were not born into wealth would often become live-in servants for noble
Who am I playing
families.
against?
They really didn't have many other options.
Oh, yeah, Summon Bilgewater. I was about to say, I was like, that looks scary. That looked momentarily scary. That looked like a lot more Bilgewater than I thought it was going to be.
Offering them high-paying jobs in big houses or castles, but most of these women were never seen again. And this man became known as the French maid killer, and he had one of the most messed up childhood
I want to do the
experiences
impossible
I've ever
lift.
heard of. And it is thought that this experience kind of changed him and ultimately set him on the path to become a killer. Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and apologize for my pronunciations of some of the French names in this video. I did look up the pronunciations, but sometimes those are not accurate, and I'm definitely going to be butchering some words in this one.
You're
And
welcome
now
for
let's
that
just go
noise.
ahead and jump in and find out
Leave
more
the heart me
about the
tempo,
French
leave the heart me
name. But
refresh.
first, I'd like to thank
Oh,
today's
I'm
sponsor,
so close to the
Kitsch.
impossible
Kitsch
lift,
is
man.
a global accessory brand that offers tons of different products, from hair clips and satin pillowcases to heatless curlers and everything in between. Their solid shampoo and conditioner bars have become a really popular option, and they have lots of different types to choose from, including coconut oil, tea tree and mint, and rice water protein. And if you're not sure which one to get, the Kitsch website also has a short quiz that you can take to help you decide which shampoo and conditioner bars will be best suited for your hair. I've just recently tried these solid rice water protein shampoo and conditioner bars, and I absolutely love how my hair has responded to these. If you're not familiar with the benefits of rice water protein, it helps to repair and strengthen damaged hair, and it can
Why'd
also
you give me
improve
yourself,
texture as
man?
well. I have not been kind to my hair over the years. I get highlights on a pretty regular basis, so I do struggle with some breakage.
Last time
And
you
because
gave me
I
a
live
full
in an
volley bear.
insanely humid climate, my little broken strands like
What
to
is
frizz up
this?
throughout the day. So I'm always on the hunt for new products to help me with this issue. And after
300,
using the
500,
rice water
250.
protein bars, I'm actually pretty impressed. My hair feels very soft.
this
and
is such
clean
pain.
And moisturized, and I also feel like my flyaways and frizz look
Now
much
I
more
never will
tame,
know
and that benefit alone
what the big
is enough
reward
for me to
is.
call this
But let me
a
tell
win.
ya.
The shampoo and conditioner bars are free of phthalates.
This is the
parabens,
best
silicones,
way
and
to do this
sulfates.
reroll
They
right
line
here.
up really, really well. I also love this little caddy. I have it attached to my shower wall, and it holds all of my shampoo and conditioner bars. Kitsch also has these little beauty bar bags labeled shampoo and conditioner, so you can store your bars in the bags to keep them safe.
Easy
and
money,
clean and
easy
keep them
money.
from
It's
getting
first.
backed up. And since there are no plastic bottles involved, you're not only helping your hair, but you're also helping the environment. I will definitely be trying out some other Kitsch products very soon. I think the next thing that I want to try is some of the solid body wash bars. There's a shea butter one that
Not
sounds
sponsored, could be
vindicates for
sponsored, though.
sponsoring this video, and now let's jump into the case. On May 28, 1861, in Lyon, France, a young woman named
I've been
Marie
there.
Pichon received some good news. While walking on the Guillotière Bridge that day, she was approached by a very nice man. The two struck up a conversation, and the man told her that he was currently employed as the head servant for a wealthy family in the town of Danneau. The man told her all about his employers and how kind and generous that they were, paying their servants 250 francs per year.
We're gonna be
which
B-Cat
was
now.
apparently a pretty substantial amount for the time. And it
Could be
just
the
so
bot
happened
chicken.
that his employers had just recently put him in charge of recruiting young women to come live in their large country home and join their staff of servants. And he thought that she would be the perfect fit. Marie was not about to pass up this amazing opportunity, so she agreed to take the job and make the move from Lyon to Danneau. And luckily for her, the man even offered to escort her to her new employer's home and help carry all of her possessions on the way. So Marie packed up everything of value that she owned into a large chest, and the man carried it for her all the way to the train station. He was a large man, and he looked strong, but he walked with a limp, which did slow him down a bit. And he also had a very distinctive face, a face that would be really hard for anyone to forget. He had piercing blue
Start
eyes,
with the Ram 2 cost
thick
champion.
black
It's gonna be a
hair,
Felios
black
because you
beard
know that we are
wrapped
playing the
around his
exact
chin,
same
and
comp
he looked
every
like he
single
may have been
time.
born with either a cleft lip or cleft
Dang
palate.
it.
He did look sort of intimidating, but his kind, calm demeanor
Guys, have you
put
bought
Marie
chicken?
at ease, and the two of them
Hi,
boarded the
chatbot.
train
Thank you for the
headed
bot
for the
chicken.
town of Montluel. The train would take them very close to their destination, with only a short walk from the station to Marie's new employer's home. And while
No
they were on
vein.
the
No
train,
vein for me.
Marie
Vein's
and
a
the
3
man had
cost.
conversation, and as each minute passed, she felt more and more comfortable with the man, and she was excited about starting her new life in a new town, working for this amazing family. When the train finally
Oh, it's
arrived
Destiny.
in Montluel, the man picked up the chest holding all of Marie's belongings, and the two exited the train and began the final leg of their
It's
journey.
Destiny because I've gotten
In
one
order to
bruiser.
get
It's
to the
Destiny.
house, the man said that they would have to walk
No,
off the
absolutely
main
no
road
vein
and
reroll.
through the woods. The sun
That's
had
banned.
started to set at
Vein's
this point,
banned.
and it was starting
Bilgewater's
to get dark,
banned.
but Marie felt
Zahn's
confident
banned.
that the man would be able to protect her if anything happened. So
Ixtal-
they
Ixtal
headed towards the dark,
banned.
secluded woods.
Ixtal.
And then
I don't
suddenly
even know how to
the
say
man
it, but it's
stopped,
banned.
and he set down the chest and he bent down to tie his shoe.
This
At
one.
least that's what Marie
Banned.
assumed he was doing. So Marie walked ahead a bit, just looking around at the dark forest.
Oh,
patiently
another
waiting
bruiser.
for the man to finish up tying his shoe. When suddenly he crept
I mean, I guess I
behind
could
her
go.
and tossed a lariat
I
around
need it for
her
a second.
neck. A lariat is a rope or a cord that's tied like a lasso.
That one on
man
the
started
reroll?
pulling the rope
Sona?
tighter and
Sona
tighter as
reroll?
Marie was
Banned.
struggling to get away, but she wasn't choking like she should have been. He had thrown the lariat at the exact moment that Marie had lifted up her arm to rub her eye, so when he tossed the rope around her neck, he caught her arm too, which protected her neck. So all he was doing at this point was pinning her hand to her face. And once he realized his mistake, he loosened his grip on the rope, and since he had been pulling with so much force, when he let up, Marie just fell to the ground. And as soon as she was free, she started running as fast as she could through the woods, abandoning everything she owned in that chest, and she didn't look back. And she kept going until she came to a group of farmers at the Jolie family farm in the commune of Baylin. Marie explained everything that had just happened, and the farmers assured her that she was safe there for the night and they would escort her back to Lyon in the morning. In the meantime, though, the farmers got together and they set out to Danube to report the incident to the authorities there.
Oh,
And
see,
after
look,
police
like
heard
it's
Marie's
actually,
entire
it's
story,
telling
they
me
immediately knew that this must be the
to
same
do
man that
this.
they had been
Like, I'm
hearing
getting
about.
all
The
of the
Danube
stuff.
police had heard stories about a man
How do I not
perfectly
do
fitting
this when it's giving me
description
all this
who had
stuff?
been traveling around the area of Lyon, offering young women high-paying jobs as live-in servants, offering to escort them to their new home, then leading them into the woods.
If you
and
give me
attacking
everything
them.
to do
This
a
had been
reroll,
happening in
I'm gonna
various
keep
towns throughout
rerolling.
this area of France over the past 6 years, and some of these
I will
women were
carry
never
it.
seen again. The body of one missing woman was discovered in a forest back in February of 1855.
Once again,
the
guys,
Danube
we have
police
to
started
remember
questioning the locals, describing the man in detail.
we have to get up to 30 after this, the two stuff.
Traits. And it didn't take long
Then we gotta
before
sit
they
at
had
30,
a name.
slowly
There was a
reroll
man
down.
living in a
Can't be going too
home
crazy
with
now.
his wife, going by the name of Raymond Dumoulard, and he fit this description perfectly. So a warrant was issued, and on June 2nd, 1861,
You guys have that written
police
down?
went out to the Dumoulard home where Raymond and his wife Marie Anne were arrested. A large team of police were called out
Yes,
to
if I do
search the
this
property,
one
and what
comp
they found
enough
was
times,
truly
everybody will do it.
disturbing. First of all, the home was in pretty bad
That's all I'm
shape,
asking
and
for.
the inside was total chaos. There was just stacks of stuff.
Are you kidding me?
everywhere.
Are you
Clothing,
kidding me?
Jewelry, heirlooms, just all spread out across the house.
Everything
and as
for
police
free?
started looking through the piles of stuff, they realized that what they were looking at,
Dude,
were the
all
stolen
it
belongings
wants,
from
the game
countless
wants me to
women,
go the
and
same
some of the
comp every
clothing was
single time.
covered in blood. The amount of
Every
clothing
single time
and
the game wants
jewelry
me to go
that they
same
were
comp.
looking at confirmed
How am I
that
not
this
supposed to go
case
the same
was
comp every
much
single
bigger
time?
than
It wants me to go the
anything
same
they
comp
could have
every
ever
single time.
imagined.
You know?
And this man
Comp every
had
time.
way more victims
Yeah,
than
I'm
they
ready.
originally thought. The man's name was not Raymond Dumoulin.
Ready for the
It was
bot chicken?
actually Martin Dumoulin.
Yeah, say the bot
He was
chicken.
born on June 22nd, 1810, to his parents Pierre and Marie Josette Ray. Martin's father Pierre had actually been born in Hungary, where he was born into a life of luxury. His name in Hungary was Pierre Dumoulin, and his family was considered nobility.
Like,
but
do
when
you
the
see
Austrian Empire was formed
how
in
I can kind of, like,
1804,
fall
the new
asleep to her
emperor
voice?
stripped
It's
Pierre's
nice.
family and other
It's nice
noble
and chill.
families of their status. So in retaliation, Pierre and the others got together and formed a plan to assassinate the Austrian emperor. But the plan fell through, and the emperor found out about it. And so he sent his men out to hunt down the conspirators. Several of the men were caught and they were publicly executed, but Pierre managed to escape. He had packed up whatever valuables and money that he could manage to carry, and he
Things all
fled the
here.
country disguised as a peasant. And by the time
Big
Pierre
stretch.
made it to France, he was almost out of money. So he settled in a small commune called Salon-les-Thermes, and he started working in the market. And he quickly became known as a good businessman, and he started managing the businesses of several
play
of
this
the
game
local
so much that
merchants.
sometimes I
He
see
changed his last name from Dumoulin
people
to Dumoulard,
that I've
which
played
to me
before
doesn't seem
in
different
this.
enough for a man who is literally a fugitive of the Austrian Empire. But
Like,
this was his
tactician
new
name.
name and his new life. And before long, he met Marie Josette
Not
Ray,
this time,
and the
though.
two of them
I don't
fell in
recognize
love
him.
together. 3 years after the birth of their first son, Martin, in 1810, they had another son named Raymond. And after the birth of Raymond, the family moved to Danube into a larger
1903
home, and they settled
Family of
into this
Killers
little
open
community.
B&B to
The
lure
residents of the-
victims.
Hey
Okay, well,
everyone,
you piqued my
welcome
interest.
back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well. If you are new to my channel, please consider subscribing if you end up liking this video. So today I have another heinous history case for you guys, and you might have heard of this one before. Today we are talking about the Bloody Benders. The Benders settled in Kansas in 1870, and they set up a business with the sole
Bloody
purpose
Benders.
of drawing in unsuspecting travelers so that they could systematically kill them. And they killed so many people that they ended up getting this whole thing down to an art. Each member of the family had their own specific job that they were to do when they were murdering their victims.
Well, that's kinda
But
cute.
then they made a mistake and they killed a very prominent person, and his family would never give up until they figured out what had happened to him. and this would be the downfall of the Benders. And what's really fascinating about this case is that crime scene photography had just really started to become a thing, so there are actual crime scene photos for this case, and I will be including as many of those as I can in this video. And now let's just go ahead and jump in. But before we get into today's case, I'd like to talk to you about today's sponsor, Toon Blast.
Not sponsored.
Toon Blast is a free-to-play mobile game where you get to solve thousands of puzzles by blasting cubes and creating powerful combos to progress
Many
through
people
the
constantly
levels.
recognize as
The
Black
game
Ops 2
follows
ranked
the
in its
Toon
heyday.
Gang, which includes Cooper Cat,
This
Wally
TFT
Wolf,
for me.
and
Hi,
Bruno Bear,
Grove.
and you get to help the Toon Gang travel around the map
Get
of the
Groby
world by
with it.
completing levels. And they're all super cute,
Just a
but Bruno
little
Bear is
bit of
definitely my favorite. There are challenges sprinkled throughout the
Groby,
game where
Groby,
you have to
Groby.
save Bruno, and those are intense. I'm not
See,
gonna lie. You
these
have to
mobile
save
game
Bruno before
ads
the
are the
clock
ads
runs
that I
out,
should
and
be
I've
getting
never
because
lost
I
Bruno
do
in this
play
video,
mobile
and now
games.
let's get back into the case.
That's what I do.
This story begins in the state of Kansas in the 1870s.
You go to
Kansas
work,
at this time was mostly miles and
play
miles
mobile
of
games on my
wild
break,
frontier land.
go
And
home,
after the Civil War ended in 1865,
stream,
the population in Kansas increased.
go to bed,
big
play
time.
mobile games.
This was mostly because of
Yeah,
the
my cake and
Homestead
trinket.
Act, which made it possible for the head of the family to stake claim on
And my matching
160 acres of vacant land in exchange for a small filing fee. This drove a lot of people out west.
Why
since
do
there
you
were
keep
millions
giving
and
me him?
millions of acres of land being offered for such a low price.
Get outta
The
here.
person would also
Exactly,
be
that's why I
required to
scram.
live on the land for 5 years,
Scram.
and during that time, they were to make improvements by
See
cultivating
you,
the
one
land
cuss.
and establishing
Okay.
farms and stuff. And once that 5 years was up, the land would officially belong to the resident.
Oh,
You could also
boozers.
expedite the process by paying $1.25
I know this seems
per
stupid.
acre.
It probably
If you chose to
is.
go that route, you would only
It just
have to
felt
remain
right.
on the property for
Goodbye
6
now.
months
Now
before
we
getting
sit.
the deed to the land.
See,
And
I
this
told
was
you, look,
actually
we're still
devastating
in
to
this
the
thing.
Native
We don't know we're about
Americans
30
that
yet.
inhabited the western region.
Have we left the
They were
Bean
watching
game?
all of these settlers coming further west into their territories, and this
Oh,
forced a lot
like
of
where
them
you're
out.
just
Some
like
tribes
work.
were relocated from their
Yeah, I
land
just
by
haven't had to
force, and they were
focus.
transported to different areas. Just
My
to
bean
make
is
room
still
for
pretty
settlement.
sick, but
So
I haven't
since
had to
Kansas was known
focus.
to have miles and miles of vacant land, lots of settlers were coming.
I only
into
play
the area.
TFT.
In 1870, there were 5 families of so-called
And it's not like,
spiritualists
oh,
that
I
came
played
to
League,
Lebec
but
County,
frick
Kansas
that
to
game.
settle down. And one of those families was
I
the
just haven't
Bender
played it.
family. Now, not much is known about the Benders before they moved to Lebec County, but they definitely made an impression on the locals when they arrived.
Don't
in the
got any
area.
horror
So when
stories
this case
behind
broke,
League.
a lot
Just
of
haven't played
people
it.
around the area started coming forward with their impressions. And the general consensus was that the Benders were really bizarre. So at first we have
Bizarre
John Bender
Benders.
Sr. or maybe William Bender Sr. He's referred to as both in the newspaper articles on this case, but he was mostly just known as Pa Bender. He was the father and husband of the family, the patriarch. He was said to be a huge man. Some even described him as looking like a bear standing on 2 feet, and he looked to be in his early 60s. He was
As you
not
shouldn't.
friendly at all, and he spoke with a really deep guttural voice. Most of the locals believed that he was of German descent. He didn't seem to know much English, so he really didn't speak to the other people in the area very often. The locals said that Pa Bender was, quote, repulsive, a hideous brute without a redeeming trait, dirty, profane, and ill-tempered. So yeah, he was not a very
I play
well-liked
League a lot.
person in the area.
I play a
Next,
lot of
we have
League.
the
It's great.
wife and
What do you
mother
mean?
Elvira Bender. Everyone knew her as Ma Bender. Ma Bender was in her 50s, and she was also not very well liked in the town. Some even described her as a she-devil. She was described as a large and very unattractive woman. She seemed to always have a scowl on her face. She spoke with a thick German accent, or what locals assumed was a German accent, but some did say that they thought maybe she was Dutch. Like I said, we don't really know where these people came from, but it was believed at the time that they were German immigrants. And Ma and Pa Bender had 2 kids, a son named John Bender Jr., who was in his mid to late 20s when they arrived in Lebec County, and a daughter named
Mom
Kate
member?
Bender, sometimes called Katie, and she was also in
I don't. I wasn't listening.
John Bender Jr.
Unfortunately,
was said to
I
be
threw.
very strange.
But here's the
He
different
would
things
break
that I
out
think
in
can
a
do.
creepy giggle at random times, and some of the locals thought that he might
This is
have
my
had
favorite
some
thing that
learning
she kind of
difficulties.
guide
And
does.
lastly, Kate Bender. She was perceived by the locals as the leader of the family. She was the most outgoing. She was also said to be very attractive. The local men loved her, and some have even said that she was so beautiful that she looked totally out of place in this rough area of Kansas. There is little to no confirmed record of these people, so over the years following this case, lots of theories and rumors about the Benders started surfacing. Some people believe that this wasn't actually a family of four, a mom, a dad, and two
Sign is
kids.
looking very cute
Some
right
actually
now.
believe that Ma and Pa Bender were not even married. They were actually brother and sister. And that John Jr. and Kate were not brother and sister, they were actually married. And if they were actually brother and sister, it's thought that Kate and John Jr. had an incestuous relationship, which we will talk more about later. Again, these are just some of the many theories that have come up over the years surrounding this family, and as far as I know, none of this has ever been proven. But whatever the case, when they arrived in Kansas, they were passing themselves off as your average, everyday family of four. So when
Excuse
the
me,
Benders
I've come
arrived
here
in
to
Lebec
yap.
County, they filed for a homestead on 160 acres of land right off the Osage Trail. The Osage Trail was a major thoroughfare running through the southeastern corner of Kansas. Lots of people traveled down the Osage Trail when they were going
I've
through
come to
Kansas.
yap.
The trail ran from Fort Scott to Independence. It was basically the equivalent to what a major highway is nowadays. So in 1870, Pa and John Jr. arrived in Lebec County, Kansas, and they staked their claim on the 160-acre plot of land right off of the Osage Trail. And the property backed up to a huge apple orchard. Now, remember, in order to eventually gain ownership of the land,
And I'm
you had to
wearing a
make
bee
improvements,
costume.
build houses, establish farms, and keep the grounds nice and tended to.
This is
and
the
that's
game I spent
exactly
the
what
most money
Benders
on.
did. They built chicken coops, fencing for farm animals.
Oh,
they
wait.
eventually ended up with several farm animals. They built horse corrals and a well, and of course they built a house on the property as well. And when they
Are
started
you
to
kidding
build
me?
the house, the first thing they did was purchase a big slab of sandstone, and this was to be the floor of the cellar. Then they dug a tunnel leading from the cellar up into the cabin. Then they built the tiny 2-bedroom cabin on top of the cellar, and it was about 100 yards off of the Osage Trail. Ma Bender and Kate arrived
Perfection.
in Lebec County in 1871 to meet up with Pa and John Jr. They had waited to arrive in Kansas
And then look at this
until
one.
the house
Oh.
was built and everything so that they could just move right in. And since their new property was
They
right
interrupted
off
me
of
while I
a
was
major
about to show you something.
thoroughfare, they
I shall
decided to
wait.
turn their home into an inn and grocery. So they made a sign that said grocery, and they put this on the front of their home. And this was actually a genius idea because an inn and grocery would be a definite stop for any weary traveler on the trail. Their home was very small, but the travelers could at least come in, grab some supplies from the grocery, and maybe stay for a hot meal and sleep indoors for the night. So using the cloth from their covered wagon as a curtain, they created a partition to separate the two rooms. In the front of the house, you had the little grocery store with some supplies, including tobacco, grain, coffee, apples, and soap. There was also a table in that room as well, and a small kitchen, and this is where their customers would sit and eat. And on the other side of the curtain, there was a small sleeping area. So as I mentioned
I
earlier,
shall
the
just sit
family
here.
claimed to be
So
spiritualists,
I'm not gonna be able to
and
get
this was
anything
especially
for a
the case
minute.
for Kate Bender. She actually started
I would
her
like
own
this one,
business
though.
advertising herself
If
as
I
a
could
medium
have that,
and a
please.
healer, claiming that she could heal blindness and deafness,
This is
among
what I'm
lots
going
of
for,
other things.
right here,
She would even
if I'm
conduct
allowed to have
seances
it.
for grieving widows who had husbands who had
If I
died in
could
the
have
Civil
it,
War,
please.
and
This
she
one
would
in
claim that she
particular.
could see
That right
and hear
there.
their spirits. Kate and John Jr. would attend the local
Nice.
Sunday school, and they kind of tried to blend in with the others, but they were
Hello?
just so strange, and they would
I was
say
like,
and do
am
things
I-
that just made
am I
people
blind?
really uncomfortable.
Can I
So
not pick
Kate
this guy
called
up?
herself a professor, and she would give lectures on spiritualism and healing and stuff like that. But during these lectures, she would also sprinkle in really odd things. Kate was even quoted advocating for incestuous relationships with siblings.
Hello?
She said, quote, "Shall we confine ourselves to a single love and deny our natures their proper sway? Even though it be a brother's passion for his own sister, I say it should not be smothered." And this comment really raised eyebrows because Kate and John Jr. were said to be a little too close. A lot of people
Yes,
thought
I
that they
can,
were
in
having
fact,
a sexual relationship just based on how they acted.
have a laser
around each
pointer
other.
that my
They
little
were
bee
very
cat-
flirtatious and extremely affectionate with each other. But like I mentioned
Why are you being
earlier,
so
some
dramatic
people have
in the
said
way that
they
I'm
were
pushing
actually
things?
married and not
Look at how
single.
far she's
And
jumping right
unfortunately,
now.
probably never know the
Absolutely
truth of
leaping to
their relationship.
conclusions.
Like I mentioned earlier, Kate was said to be very
Why are you being so
beautiful.
dramatic?
She was
Are you
also
always
described
like
as
that?
voluptuous,
You
and she
always
supposedly
jump that
had
far?
many
You know, when I'm
relationships
doing
with other men
things?
in the area. And the men would all follow
Someone paid
her around with
attention.
little puppy dogs as well. She could get them to do pretty much whatever she wanted them to do. In fact,
Wild.
in one source, it was said that when Kate had a flyer printed advertising her skills as a healer and a medium, she had the local men go around and pass out the flyers for her. And they happily did it. She had them wrapped around her little finger. And one of the men who was really obsessed with Kate was their neighbor, a man named Rudolph Brockman. and Rudolph Brockman comes back up later in the case. But even though she had all of these men after her, she never really gave them too much attention aside from the occasional hookup. She always returned home to her family so they could conduct the actual Bender family business. And that business was the killing of random travelers passing through the Osage Trail. These travelers would stop at the end as they were passing through the area for a hot meal and a place to sleep for the night, but many of them would never leave the Bender family inn. Based on the state of the bodies and eyewitness accounts from people
Now that's a thought right there.
The inn, this is how the
That's an absolute thought right there.
Although the actual victims count is thought to be in the 20s. It would start with an unsuspecting
That's a
traveler.
thought right there.
They would stumble upon the inn and grocery as they were making their way down the Osage Trail. They would stop in for dinner.
Write that down.
and a place to stay for
I'm
the
glad that
night.
everybody's
Some
note-taking
likely
right now.
stopped in to get supplies from the grocery. Kate would be the one to enter the door
Write
and
that
greet
down.
them and then guide them.
Very
into
important,
the
write that
house.
down.
Kate would then offer them food and ask them to sit at the head of the table. Now, the seat that they were instructed to sit in was not facing the curtain that acted as a partition. The victim would actually be sitting with their back to the curtain, and they would be sitting so close to the partition that the back of their heads would sometimes be touching the canvas. Kate would sit with them at the table and engage them in small talk, making sure to ask them about their families and their financial situation. She would ask them, does your family know where you're headed, and are you traveling with a lot of valuables, things like that. A lot of the people traveling down the Osage Trail would be in the process of relocating to new areas. The men would often go ahead of their families to establish land and get things going. So because of this, a lot of the men were traveling alone and with a lot of valuable possessions.
Just give me
and
the
money with them.
sign,
So
please.
once Kate asked them some seemingly harmless questions, she would then
Except
decide if the
please.
person was a good candidate to be murdered. And if they were deemed to be a good candidate, she would then give a signal, and Pa Bender or John Jr. would sneak out from behind the curtain and bash the person's head in with a hammer. And the victim would never have seen it coming. Then they would open a trap door that they had built under the dining room table that led down to the cellar. The body would then be pushed down into the cellar where Kate or Ma Bender would slit their throats just to ensure that they were dead. Then the entire family would strip them of any valuables, inclling the clothes that they were
Your
wearing.
Chipotle's on its
Then
way,
they
let's
would just
go.
be left there in the cellar
Love
until
that.
the family
Little
figured out how
Chipotle.
to dispose of the body. And Kate's popularity in the
now.
area definitely helped lure in victims. She had really made a name for herself in the area as a medium and a professor, and also she was very attractive, so several men would just stop by the inn just to talk to Kate. The Bender's first victim is believed to have been a man named William Jones in May of 1871. William Jones was a stonemason, and he was traveling down the trail towards Independence to buy a plot of land, and he just happened to be carrying a lot of cash with him at the time. After being missing for a few weeks, his body was discovered by two young boys.
I was about to say, I was like, this might be my first loss.
His throat had been slit from ear to
Thank you
ear,
for the bye, chicken
and
burrito.
the back of his skull had been bashed in. And Drum Creek
I want to
was
progressively
not far
like
from the Bender
say
Inn,
that
but
quick
the man
enough
who owned
where
the
it
property
just like
where
it doesn't
Drum
like
Creek was
sound like I'm saying
located
anything.
was actually the person of interest in the case for a while, since the body had been dumped on his property, although nothing was really looked into at the time. Then in February of 1872, two more
God, he's
victims
so
were
thick.
found. Their bodies were found in the snow near the town of Oswego, and they had identical wounds on their bodies, bashed in skulls
Oh my
and
gosh,
slit
I
throats,
will
and the identity
buy
of these
him,
two men was never
jeez.
discovered. Again, no one really looked into these murders. Some of the other known victims include a man named Ben Brown, who had been traveling the trail on business. He
God,
was
we're like
traveling in
so
his brand new
close
wagon
to
and
things.
horses, and he never made it to his destination. William McCrotty was also traveling the trail and carrying a large sum of cash, estimated to be about $2,600. He was also never seen again. A young man named Johnny Boyle was traveling the trail with $1,900 cash on him. He set out on business, and he was also never heard from again. Then
Okay.
a man named Henry McKenzie disappeared. Now, Henry McKenzie
I had
was related
these-
to a very prominent couple in the area. A man named Leroy Dick was the township officer in the Osage area, and it sounds
I don't wanna
like
talk
this
about
was
it.
the closest thing that they had to like a sheriff. Well, Henry McKenzie was Leroy's wife's
I don't wanna
cousin.
talk about
Henry had
the goof
visited
I made.
Leroy's home in the Osage
talk
Township,
about
and
the
then
goof
he
I
set
made.
out towards Independence on the
Then-
Osage Trail to visit some of his relatives. And when he left, he was carrying about $2,000 on him. And the Benders just continued their reign of terror throughout all of 1872. And by 1873, Sheriff Leroy was receiving more and more letters from families of missing loved ones. Their friend
saw
or
that thing?
relative had set out on the Osage Trail on business or in search of new land, and they hadn't been heard from in weeks. Some of the families actually traveled to the Osage Township to ask questions and try to follow the same path that their loved ones had likely taken. But every time they could only track them to Lebec County before they lost their trail. It was like they had just vanished into thin air, and the amount of disappearances was really starting to concern the locals. They couldn't help but notice all these families coming into the area in search of missing travelers, and it was really starting to freak them out. But at this point, there were no leads, and no one suspected the vendors could have anything to do with the disappearances. Then in March of 1873,
Takes me a second, but I do find a build that I want to abuse.
19-month-old daughter Marianne.
Just gotta find one that you
His wife
love.
had passed away not too long ago, and
You'll
he
never
really
be
wanted
upset.
to move closer to his family in Iowa. So he wrote to his family and friends to let them know that he was headed their way, and he also told them about his travel plans. Then he went to his neighbor and friend, a man named Dr. William York, and he bought a wagon.
But I definitely
and
could have had
some horses from him for the
Let's
journey.
just start
He
punk
loaded up
right
the
now.
wagon with all of his possessions, and he said his goodbyes, and then he and his daughter
I
headed
would
out
like
towards
this
Iowa,
piece,
traveling along
this
the
piece,
Osage
this
Trail.
piece,
And
this
George made the
piece,
unfortunate
this
mistake
piece,
of stopping at the Bender Inn for the night, and he and his daughter would never be seen alive again. But this would set off a chain of events that would eventually lead to the
Yeah,
discovery
you
of the
run
Bender
away.
slaughterhouse.
Oh,
And
I'm
George
pretending I'm
Longcore's
going for
friend,
something.
Dr. William
I'm
York,
actually going for
becomes
this.
a very important
See, this is the
part of the story.
problem with my
It would be the
tactician
murder of
is
Dr.
the
York that
shadow
finally put
kind of
an
messes
end
me
to the
up when I'm going for
disappearances in
things.
Lebec County. As part of my research for this case, I read a book called The Bender Tragedy. This book really stands out from the rest on this case because it was written by a woman named Mary York, who was Dr. York's wife. So since his wife wrote this book herself, we know a lot more details about Dr. York's life than any of the other victims. Dr. York was born in Illinois, but his parents eventually left Illinois and relocated to Fort Scott, Kansas. He graduated from Lind Medical University
What's this
in
one again?
Chicago, and he eventually joined the Army. During his time in the Army, Dr. York was taken captive
Oh, I got a
and thrown
bee.
into a prison
I
in
caught a
Tyler,
bee
Texas,
fish.
with almost
What the
5,000
heck?
other men. And some of the prisoners
I haven't
were
seen that I caught a
tortured
bee
on.
fish.
Dr. York and
Wait, we're gonna
several
need to
others were
play this
strung
back.
up by their thumbs with their feet kept up off the ground, and the pain was apparently so intense that some of the men didn't survive it. Once he was finally free from the prison and the war was over, Dr. York, his wife Mary, and their kids settled on a beautiful plot of land right outside of Independence, Kansas, and he set up a medical practice there. His practice was said to be very successful, and it kept him really busy. From what I could tell, he was the only doctor in the area, so he was constantly seeing patients. Then on March 3rd, 1873, Dr. York decided to go on a little trip to Fort Scott, Kansas to visit his parents, and while he was passing through, he planned to stop
See, look,
at
it's-
Oswego
this is me.
and Osage Township to visit some friends who owed him some money. He was going to try to collect these
Right
debts
here.
from his friends. Now, by this time, the disappearance
On
of
Koboku?
George and Mary
Oh, wait, hold on.
Longcore
There's some
had
over here.
become known to the locals,
Choose.
including Dr. York. When George didn't show
But also,
up in
I need to
Iowa
see
around
this.
the time that he should have, his family sent letters asking where he was. People in this
Look.
area had been hearing about all
I
the
caught a bee
disappearances
fish.
on the Osage Trail, and his friends back in Independence knew that something wasn't right. He should have arrived in Iowa by now.
I caught a bee
Then
fish.
Dr. York heard that an abandoned wagon and a team of horses, fitting the description of the ones that Dr. York had given to George, had been found near the town of Oswego, and there were signs of foul play. There was blood found on the wagon, but there was no sign of George or Marianne. And a witness said that they saw a large man abandoning the wagon the night before. The horses and wagon were being held in Oswego, so Dr. York decided that while he was on his journey, that he would stop and take a look at the horses and the wagon and potentially identify them as the ones that he'd sold to George Longcore. So Dr. York left on March 3rd, 1873, and he headed to the nearby town of Independence to stay with his brother, Colonel Alexander York. Dr. York spent the night with his brother, and then he left the next day on March 4th, 1873, to continue on his journey. And he told his brother that he expected to be home with his wife and kids within 10 to 14 days. But of course, we know that that would never happen. It was later discovered that Dr. York did in fact make it to Oswego, and he did identify the wagon. Some of the men in the area were searching all over for George and Marianne, and they were driving rivers, they were searching the wooded areas, but nothing was found. Dr. York reportedly told the searchers that it was not likely that George drove the wagon there himself because it would have taken
Sorry for
him
the
out of the
sneeze.
way
Bless
of his
you.
destination,
Thank you.
which was Iowa. Dr. York believed that George and Marion had been murdered in a different location, and then the killers had moved the wagon to another spot. And before he left, Dr. York promised the men that he would launch a full investigation as soon as he made it back home. Dr. York made it to Fort Scott to visit his parents, and then a week later, he headed back home on March 10th, which meant that he would have arrived home on March 11th, much earlier than the 18th, which is when he planned to return. It's thought that he cut his trip short so that he could get back home and start the investigation. So when 14 days passed and Dr. York still wasn't home from his trip, his wife Mary knew something bad had happened, but she really tried to stay positive and push all of the worries out of her mind. She knew that lots of
Little meow. It's all adorable. It's all so cute.
Or maybe he had decided to visit his parents a little longer than he thought. But then the next day, a man came to her home asking to see Dr. York. So Mary told the man that he was still away on his trip to Fort Scott, Oswego, and Osage Township, but he should be home any day now. And when she said this, the man immediately looked concerned. He told Mary that Dr. York had visited him in Oswego on his way to Fort Scott, and before he left, he told the man that he would either visit him one more time on his way back home, or if he decided to go through the Osage Township, he would at least write
That's
him
how
to
bears
let him know
talk.
that he returned home. But he never heard from him, and with all the people going missing lately, the man decided to travel to Dr. York's home to check on him. After hearing this, Mary could not deny it any longer. She knew her husband was dead. She alerted both of his brothers, Colonel Alexander York and Senator
Brother
Edward
bear
York,
shapes
and they
different.
set out to look for their brother. Now, not long after
Ooh,
Dr.
I
York's
realized that.
disappearance,
No,
the
it's
people
fine,
living
though.
in Osage Township
But I
were growing
realized
more
something.
and more concerned over all of the missing travelers. So on April 8, 1873, at the annual school board meeting at Harmony Grove Schoolhouse,
Polly Bear
a
always
group of
looks
locals
funny
stood
when
up
he's
for
turned
their
around,
concern.
since he
They
just
said
got
they
such
had a
long
feeling
torso
that
and such a little
quote,
butt.
secret den of human butchery was operating in the area. And so it was decided that an investigation would be launched and they would conduct searches of every single campsite
believe
in
with
the
that
area.
again.
And if they didn't find anything after that, they would resort to searching each and every homestead on Osage Trail. There were
You're
about
going
100
crazy.
people that attended that meeting, and two of those people were none other than Pa Bender and John Jr. But I guess they weren't too concerned about all of this because they didn't try to escape at this
Thanks
point.
for the STEM
And
stream,
a couple
of
of weeks
course.
later, the York brothers,
course,
along with
of
about
course.
50 other men, arrived in the area.
Hey, no,
And
okay.
after questioning some of the townspeople,
Yeah,
they
okay.
learned that Dr. York had been seen in the town of Parsons on March 10th. And a shopkeeper
Like, I
told
wish
them
he
that
would turn
Dr.
around.
York had
I
actually
mean,
went
he'll turn
into his
around
shop
during the
to buy
game.
some cigars.
I'll
And
put him
while he was
here.
there, the shopkeeper told Dr.
So that you
York
guys can
that if
see
he
what I'm talking
needed to
about.
rest for the night, he should go stay at the Bender family inn. So they all made their way to the Bender home and they started asking questions. The Benders did
Like,
tell
look
them
at him.
that yes, Dr.
Such
York
long
did
torso.
in fact stay here for the night,
Little
but
butt.
he left the next morning and
When
we
he
never saw
runs.
him again. Then Kate
He just
offered
doesn't
up
do
her
leg day.
services as a medium. She says that she could use her powers to send herself into a trance and speak to her spirit guide,
Would be
which
having
was apparently
Subway
a very
Surfers.
old Native
Yeah, I totally
American
forgot there was a
chief. But she
YouTube
says
video
that she
playing
can't
right
do
now
this
as
on the
well.
spot. She needs a little time to
It's helped me
prepare, so she
focus.
asked
This is
them
the
to
most
come back
focused
the
I've ever
next day.
been.
So most of the men in the group were very suspicious of the Benders right off the start. They were just giving them the creeps. And even though they were all very suspicious,
I forgot that I had
they did agree to come back
an
the
anime
next day
thing
and
with
visit.
this.
So the next day,
with
they
that
returned
guy.
to the Bender
Oh
Inn,
my
but
gosh.
Kate claimed that she went into a
Stop
trance, but
for-
she didn't see anything significant. So Edward.
Sorry.
Know anything about that.
Very
and
important.
so John Jr. launches into this whole story
Very
about how
important
he
dance.
had been ambushed near the creek
could I have a
around the
Haji
same time as
Waji?
the murder, and it was probably the same people who had attacked him. He even takes all of the men down by the creek and he reenacts the
Scared of the
entire attack.
buns and
This was
thighs, buns and
obviously a
thighs.
flimsy attempt to throw suspicion off of them, but it did not work. The men knew that he was lying, and it just made him look even more suspicious. And most of the men wanted to kill the Benders right there on the spot because they were just so convinced
So I wanna
that
go
they were
9.
guilty. Edward York wouldn't let them do that since
I
there
don't
just
know if I
wasn't
will
enough
be able
evidence
to.
at the time. So they all left the Bender Inn once
I kinda sound
again,
like
but
Slan
this
right
time
there.
the Benders knew that the game was over. They had to get out of the area. A couple of weeks
That
later,
gif
a
of
wagon was
hotkey on your
found
thingy when you
abandoned
press
on the
it
bank
and
of
it
a
gift takes
river
over
right
your
outside
screen
of Osage
of me
Township.
like doing the
wagon had
dance.
bullet holes all on the sides, and there were blood stains everywhere, and it was likely there for days because the horses had gotten so hungry that they had eaten off
Do you think
parts
that
of
last
the
one was a
wood.
pretty
This
good
wagon
one?
likely belonged to the Benders, and they had just abandoned it there. Then on May 1st, a neighbor of the Benders named Billy
Frick you,
Cole was
Fizz.
passing by, and he noticed
Go
that
home.
the animals had escaped their enclosures. and they were just kind of wandering around the property. So he decided to go up to the house to investigate, and he found a dead calf, and the animals appeared to be starving. So he looked into the window and he sees that the house is completely empty and the wagon and the horses are gone. The Benders had obviously
How's it
abandoned their
still
farm days
60
ago.
to
News
level?
of this spreads all throughout the area, making its way to Sheriff
Why is this taking
Leroy Dick.
forever
He
to
gathers
level?
a group of about 50 men and he heads over to the Bender home. Hundreds of locals head to the
I
Bender
need that
property
coin
as
right
well,
now.
and there they found a house of horrors.
What's John
First of all,
going?
Edward York finds Dr. York's glasses in the house. They also
Marcia
found 3
7?
hammers that had been hidden.
Does
under
he have
the
an
stove.
artifact?
Also, a knife is found that had dried
Yes.
blood still on it. Then they found the trap
Oh,
door
playing
under
against
the
John.
table leading down into the cellar. And
He
when
might
they
be me.
opened the trap door, they were
What's the
punched in the
artifact?
face
Hellfire
with the most
hatchet.
foul odor. And most of these men had been in the Civil War. And they
Is this
used
some
it
huh?
instead. So this smell was unmistakable. They make the decision to.
Oh,
literally
wait,
lift
that
up
I'm
the
listening
house
to?
and ship
No.
him away from
No,
the
Zach,
cellar so that they could
unfortunately.
get in
This is
easier.
murder,
And when they
actually.
finally got down there, the entire cellar floor was completely caked in dried blood.
Turn it
They
on.
also broke up the sandstone
Turn it
slab,
on.
which was the
Turn
floor
it
of the
on.
cellar,
Turn
and
it on.
underneath
Turn it
that
on. I
was
don't want to
columns
lose.
that
I don't want to
lifted the floor
lose.
of
I want to have a
the
cool
images,
game
and
where I
under
win
that
every
slab
single
they found
one.
bones and flesh everywhere.
Let's
And just
go.
whenever they were getting ready to leave the property, they thought that they had really found
I've been watching
everything
Body
that
Cam
they were
videos,
going
so I'm
to
all
find.
ears.
The sun
Yeah.
started to set, and the way the rays were beaming
This
off
is
the
a 19th
ground, they could see
century
depressions all
family of
over the
killers that
property,
opened a
leading
B&B.
into the apple orchard. So they decided to start digging, and before long, Dr. York's body was discovered. He had been buried head down with his feet at the top of the grave and just barely covered by dirt.
It is a real
His
story.
throat
Her name
had
is
been
Summer
cut and a
Sanchez.
perfectly round hole was in his skull. They also found
Like,
the body
obviously it
of
wasn't an
George
Airbnb,
Longport,
but it
who'd been
was
killed in the same
like a
manner as the
hostel kind
others.
of
And sadly,
thing.
they did find the body of his 19-month-old daughter.
Oh,
and
great
the body had
heavens!
No sign of trauma or any wounds, so it is believed that she was actually buried alive. And Sheriff Leroy also finds the body of his wife's cousin, Henry McKenzie. He didn't even know that Henry was missing. The bodies of a man and a woman were also found, and it's still not known who these people were. They were never identified. Some of the missing men that we had mentioned earlier were found there on the property as well. Johnny Boyle's body was found at the bottom of the well, and Ben Brown and William McCarty were both buried on the property. All of the
Johnny
bodies had the same
doesn't
type
know
of
that he's
wounds,
stuck in
aside from
a
the baby,
well.
a hole in the skull, and a cut throat. And the head of one of the hammers found under the stove matched the exact size and shape as the holes in the victims' heads. So it is believed that this hammer was used during the attack. There were also lots of body parts found in some of the graves.
I might win.
And some of them did not belong
We'll
to the
see.
victims that had been found. So that's why it's thought that the victim count is actually much, much higher than we think. And because these were just random body parts with no actual body they belong to, it is thought that the Benders could have dismembered some of the victims. Once word really started to spread about all of this,
How
thousands
to
of
never lose a game.
some were there to
How
try
to
identify
never
missing
lose a
loved ones,
game
and some were
in
just there out of
TFT.
curiosity.
Come on
The
now.
locals started to think that there had to be others involved in these murders. It couldn't
20
just
game
be
win
the
streak.
Benders. It was thought that the Benders were in charge of the killing, and then the victims' possessions and belongings were passed off to someone else to be sold off.
Hi, Kyler.
The townspeople were very, very angry
And a
about all
promotion.
this, and since
God.
the Benders weren't around at the moment, to
God,
turn their out
finally.
on, they turned their attention
Holy
to the
cow.
alleged accomplices,
Huh.
including their friend
GG.
and neighbor Rudolph
Huh,
Brockman.
GG.
Remember Rudolph Brockman? He was the neighbor
Oh,
who
great
was obsessed with
heavens.
Kate.
Oh
Well, it became
my
widely
God, that
believed
took
he was actually an
forever.
accomplice to the Bender murders. An angry mob
Scotty
of locals
doesn't.
captured him and hung him from a tree until he was almost dead, and then they would let up. And they repeated this 3 more times before Rudolph
I don't know what any of
finally
that stuff
convinced
is, so
them
I'm just
that he
gonna
was
look at
not
it.
involved with the Bender murders, and they finally just had to let him go.
I don't play
However,
League.
years later, Rudolph was arrested and sentenced to 20 years in prison for the rape and murder of his own 18-year-old daughter. This became a worldwide
How do
case.
I-
Papers all over were
Oh,
printing
okay.
articles about the bloody Benders. And as the story started to spread, people started coming forward with their own close call at the Bender family inn. One woman had visited the Bender inn to ask Kate for a refund on some treatment she'd given her for an illness. The treatment wasn't working and she wanted her money back. And Kate got really, really angry, but she convinced the woman to stay and take part in a seance. During the seance, the woman said the Bender started speaking gibberish. Then they pulled out a pistol, a club, and a knife, and they started just kind of like moving them around the table. The woman panicked and she ran out of the house as fast as she could, and she hid in some tall weeds right
I don't know
near
what
the
any of
property.
this
And she
is.
said that Paul Bender and John Jr. got on their horses to search for her, but she managed to escape. Then a man named
that's
William
cute.
Pickering said that he had visited
That's
the
cute
Bender
right there.
Inn to have dinner and to sleep over, but when Kate insisted that he sit at the head of the table, he
Oh,
refused because there was a
oh.
gross-looking stain on the canvas partition right
Oh,
near where his head
Swain,
would
dramatic.
be. This was likely dried blood spatter from hitting the
Less
victims over the head
dramatic.
with the hammer. Kate got really angry that he refused to sit in the seat, and she threatened him with a
Terrifying.
knife, but he managed to escape. Then a Catholic priest named Father Paul Ponziglione said that when
Jarvin.
he visited the inn, he happened to see Pa Bender fumbling around with a hammer, and it made him really
Samira.
uncomfortable. So he made an excuse to
Wow,
go
that's
outside. He
fun.
told them that he needed to go check on his horses, and he would be right
What's
back,
the-
but he took off. Then a woman named Mrs.
Keys.
Fitz visited the inn, and while she was sitting at the head of the table,
Now that's
she
adorable.
could see movement behind the curtain out of the corner of her eye, and then Kate yelled
What
out
i-
a
what is
command, but the
this?
woman managed to jump up and flee before they had time
I
to
don't
attack
know
her.
any of
The
this.
authorities were able
All I
to
know is the
piece
cute
together
stuff.
what the Benders had been doing to their victims after they heard these witness accounts from all these close calls with these
New
people, and after
icons.
seeing the wounds on the victims.
It's the one that
And
I do, 'cause I
unfortunately,
really
we
love
don't know
Poros.
exactly what happened to the Benders after they left the inn. For years after this case broke, there were stories of sightings of the
What's
Benders
crazy
all over
is
the
I have
place. There were so
46,000
many innocent people who
blue
were
essence.
arrested and held for
That's
long
gonna go
periods
unused.
of time because they were thought to be the Benders. The Benders were said to have been
Don't got
spotted
much
in the
use for
town
it.
of Thayer at the train station. It was said that John
Let me
Jr.
see
and
this.
Kate went one way and Ma and Pa Bender went another. Then John Jr. and Kate went to an outlaw community near the Texas and New Mexico border. John
Oh, yeah,
Jr.
that's a
was
good one.
eventually spotted
That's a
near the
good
border,
gif.
but he had a stroke
That's a
before
good
he
gif
could be
right there.
arrested. Again,
I don't know how
none
to
of
make
that
it
has been
pop up on
proven.
the
These are
screen
just
fully,
some
but
of the
that's a good
stories
gif
that
right
have
there
come
if I
up
do
over
say
the
so
years. There were
myself.
also several groups of vigilantes that claimed that they
I think
had
people,
caught and killed
I think
the
people
family,
who murder
but
people should
no
get
bodies were
sentenced
ever
the rest of the
presented.
years of the
Then in
person they killed, the
1880s,
average
a
year's
person
lifespan
fitting
plus
Pa
the murder
Bender's description
sentence.
was arrested for murder in Idaho.
I
Apparently,
think-
this man murdered his victim with a hammer. He
I,
was taken into custody,
I have a
and
strong
people
feeling
from the Osage
for
area
torture,
were called on to come identify
and I think
him
that
as the Pa
eye for an
Bender.
eye,
But
like
before
when
they made
people
it
do the
there,
whole,
man allegedly
what's it
cut
called?
off his own foot in an attempt to escape his shackles, and he bled to
Like
death
someone
in
get the
his
death
cell.
sentence, and
it's
like,
said that
yeah,
the
like
body
that's
was too
cool, but I
badly
think you should get a
decomposed by
death
the time
sentence
that
and the
people
way that
arrived
you
to
got the
identify
death
him,
sentence.
so they couldn't say for sure if
Like
this was
whatever
Pa
you
Bender
did
or
to
not.
someone to
Then
get the
5
death
years after
sentence,
that,
you should
two
get
women were arrested in Michigan for
that
theft.
exact same
They
way.
claimed to be Elmira Griffith and
Yes,
her
but
daughter
slightly more
Sarah
intense
Davis.
and drawn out.
Again, the
Like that Black
authorities were
Mirror
convinced that
episode where
these
that
two women
person
were actually
and
the
her,
Ma and
she had to
Kate
keep
Bender.
living
They had Sheriff Leroy
that
come to
same
Michigan from the
fear
Osage
every
Township
single
to
day,
identify
and
the
then they would
women,
erase her
and
memory,
he
and
was
then she would have
convinced
to
that this
do it every
was
single day.
actually
Yeah,
Ma
something
and
like
Kate.
that.
The women were then transported back to
I would like
Kansas to
that.
stand trial, but before they moved forward, there were a panel of 16 locals created. These
Stabby
16
kitty.
people had all dealt with the Benders at some point back in the 1870s, and the panel was supposed
Tactician
to decide
change?
whether or not
Yeah,
this was in
I
fact
felt it was.
Ma and Kate
Oh, I
Bender.
should have changed
7 of the
again
people
because I've
said
changed
with
every
100%
like with the
certainty that
first.
yes, this was Ma and Kate. 6 of them
What was
said
last
no,
placement? I was
this
in the
is
dead
not Ma
zone,
and Kate, and the others
first.
were undecided.
I'm
And
plat
in
3
the end,
now.
the women were released.
This
The
why I shouldn't be a
judge
judge.
just
Oh
couldn't
yeah,
go through the
there's like
trial
many
if
a
it was
reason
any
why
doubt that
I'm
these
not
were
like
the
making
Benders.
legal
So
decisions.
as far as we know, the Benders could have totally escaped
I'm against
justice
torture
and just went
to
on
get
to
answers
commit
from
more
people because I
crimes
don't think
somewhere
that
else.
works. Because
And
that's how
we'll
you get
never
false
know if this was,
confessions.
in
But
fact,
after
a
you have
family
been
of
charged
4,
and
a
it's like
husband,
completely
a wife, and their
confirmed
2
that you were
children,
the one
or
that
if they
did
were
it,
just
I think
4
you should get
people who
tortured in the
happened
way
to
that
find
you
each other,
messed up
and
other
they all
people.
decided to murder. And that was
Thoughts?
the case of the Bloody Benders.
I
Let me know
feel
what
like
you
it
think
would
about this one
dissuade
down in the
people from
comments. And also,
killing
please
because
feel
then they'd
free
be
to
like,
leave
well,
me case
shoot,
suggestions in the
I'm about to
comments.
get
I
got
am
in the
trying to
same way
clean
that I
up my
got
October
others.
lineup, and
See,
I'm
I already
going
have a
to focus
bruiser, so it's
more
telling me
on
to
my
go for that
creepy
again.
cases. So let me know if you have any that you would like to hear. Please subscribe if you like this type of content and follow me on Instagram at summer_SanchezYT. And thanks again to Toon Blast for sponsoring this video. Don't forget that. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope you've all been having the best day. This video is scheduled to go live on Halloween Day, so happy Halloween. Today we
Like
are
people went through
talking
live
about a very
instances and they're
disturbing case that took
confirmed
place
ones. Yeah,
in
like just
October of
do it the exact
1988
same
in
way that they did it to
Greenfield,
others.
Massachusetts. And the person
Because
who
I
was
thought it was
responsible
due
for the
on
crime
to
to
others
this
as you
case
would like
was
to be
absolutely
due on
obsessed with
to.
the Friday the 13th movies, really all horror movies, but
Quit.
especially Friday the 13th. And he wasn't just obsessed with the movies, he idolized the main villain in the Friday the 13th movies.
See,
Jason
it wants me
Voorhees.
to go
He
it.
constantly
Look,
talked about Jason.
like, are you
He
kidding
had
me?
Jason dolls, Jason posters, Jason makeups and
It
costumes
wants me to
and
go.
masks and weapons.
Go for it.
He literally wanted to become Jason Voorhees. And lots of people like horror movies, so the fact that he really liked horror movies is not the issue here. What made this obsession unsettling was the fact that this person was also suffering from a lot of mental health issues, and he was having a lot of really dark and disturbing thoughts about killing people. And he was very vocal about these thoughts. He would constantly talk about all this to his friends, and he would say that he really wanted to kill someone one day and he wanted to know how it felt, and he would talk about the ways that he would go about murdering people. And eventually he just started playing out this really sadistic fantasy over and over again
like
in
that.
his head. He fantasized
come
about
on
chasing
now.
down a teenage girl and brutally killing her.
In Early
And
Beach?
he wouldn't rest until he got to live out that fantasy. And sadly,
Like, don't
this
worry.
did lead to the
Be
horrific
doctor.
murder of an 18-year-old girl. And this all completely threw the town of Greenfield into a state of panic. This all took place right before Halloween.
There was a real life
and that just
Dexter
added an
person
extra layer
who
of
was killing
creepiness to
serial
the
killers. I
situation.
think it was
And the
down
entire
in,
community
or like
was worried that the killer would
Elimming
strike
like
again
bad
on Halloween
guys.
night.
I think
So,
it
yeah,
was
let's just go ahead and
down
jump right into it.
south.
But before we do,
Can't remember if it was South America or like Central America, but there was a guy who did
is
it.
a meal service that is now owned by HelloFresh. And
No,
they
there was
truly
one guy
have
who was pretty
something for
successful at
everyone.
it.
The
It was
Factor meals
down,
come straight
like,
to your
South
door. They're
America,
already cooked, fresh, and
Central
ready.
America.
It only takes 2 minutes to heat up in the microwave, and you are ready to enjoy. Factor meals are always fresh,
Let me
they're
look it
never
up.
frozen, and they have a team of gourmet chefs creating each and every meal. And literally everything I've tried from Factor so far has been absolutely delicious. And my kids love Factor as well. We are a super busy family, and there are nights where me and my husband just don't have time to cook. So instead of ordering pizza or something like that, my kids can just go grab a Factor meal out of the fridge. And it's so nice. The meals are so easy to heat that my kids can do pretty much the whole thing by themselves. And they have a dietitian approved nutritious meal.
March 5th, 2023, Mogi das Cruzes, Sao Paulo, Brazil. It was just after dawn on a quiet Sunday, and a man sat outside his sister's house in a calm residential neighborhood because he was visiting for the weekend. And nothing about the scene really stood out until a car slowed down to a stop along the curb. And inside the car were multiple hooded figures whose faces were hidden and whose weapons were ready. And in seconds, they sprang from the vehicle and opened fire. The gunshots just tore through the morning stillness, hitting the man at close range. Then he would collapse on the pavement, no time to react, just riddled with bullets. But it wasn't over, because one attacker would step forward, and in a final act of brutality, he would slit the man's throat so deep that police later described it as near decapitation. Police would also describe it as an execution, a professional hit. And given who the victim was, few were surprised at all, because this man had made enemies in every corner of the underworld. Men with long memories and violent grudges. So some said it was revenge, and others said that it was inevitable. Because this wasn't just a murder. This was the final chapter in one of Brazil's darkest legends. And the man laying dead now on the sidewalk was once known as Pedrinho Matador. But who really was Pedrinho Matador? And why was he killed? Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder. All things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick, twisted, beautiful, intellectually minded.
Chris, you
freak.
can alert.
And today we are doing just that. We are deep diving into one of the most prolific vigilante serial killers in the world. Actually, the most prolific vigilante serial killer in the world. The kill count is insane, and this guy's backstory is even more insane. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes.
Did I turn it
and
down too
bust through
much?
this
I felt like
windshield
she was a little
into
bit
this
like
vigilante
louder.
serial killer together. Pedro Rodriguez Filio was born on June 17th, 1954, and there is some discrepancy on his birth date, so it's either this or October 29th, 1954. But alas, he was born in the rural town of Santa Rita do Supakai,
Rural
Brazil,
town?
and his life
Rural?
would begin in violence. Because while still in the
You
room,
mean
Pedro's
rural?
mother, Manuela, was kicked in the stomach by her
Rural.
husband, Pedro Sr., during one of many brutal beatings. And that kick would leave Pedro with with a permanently dented skull, just a physical marker of the rage he was born into. And his father, though insane, worked really hard when sober, but alcohol just turned him into a complete monster, prone to explosive rages that terrified the entire household. And Manuela, for her part, ruled the children with an iron fist and a Bible. She was very quick to punish and had no hesitation when it came to beating her sons, so it was kind of like a domino effect in the household. And Pedro was actually the oldest in what ended up being at least 8 siblings. And he took that position very seriously because family was all that the poor had in Brazil, so it was everything to him. And in a home dominated by fear, he believed it was his responsibility to look out for the smaller siblings. So that sense of duty would become central to his whole identity. And later, his violence. So the family wasn't necessarily starving, but life was really hard because clean water was often diverted to the fields and medical care was very scarce, and disease at this point was very rampant, and the poor were treated as disposable. And there was only one place that Pedro really felt safe, and that was with his maternal grandparents. His grandfather, Joaquin, was a butcher and actually taught Pedro how to hunt, fish, plant crops, and slaughter animals with great precision. Some foreshadowing for you. And at the butcher shop, Pedro learned how to bone an ox and how to use a blade and just generally how to kill. Some more foreshadowing for you. But Joaquin also tried to instill in Pedro a sense of morality and what it means to be just. He would go on to say,
"He also taught me how to be worthy, correct, and just man. My grandfather loved me. Of all the grandchildren, I was the dearest."
And Pedro's grandmother had her own beliefs. She told him that drinking ox blood would make him strong, and Pedro believed her. And by the time he was 10, Pedro was actually working at a chicken slaughterhouse, using the very tools and methods that his grandfather had taught him. And he also hunted monkeys for meat and pelts, he fished, and helped provide for his family in any way that he could. At the ripe age of 10 years old, no less. Like, what was I doing when I was 10, man? I think just like sniffing markers, maybe? Yeah, I mean, I was definitely doing that. Don't remember a lot from back then, probably because I was sniffing markers so much. Anyway, but the lessons he learned were clear. Survival was earned, and justice wasn't given.
On the
it had to be taken. And Pedro, as a child, was very small, wiry, but very serious as well. He was a bit of an old soul, and what he lacked in size, he made up for with intensity. He was fearless, kind of dangerously so, and he showed early signs of deep sensitivity to injustice, especially when it involved his family. He was like the ultra final boss empath, if you will, but also not because he ended up killing people, but you know what I mean. But that sensitivity curdled into something much darker in 1967 when Pedro was only 13 years old. He had taken his cousin's horse for a short ride without permission. Just an impulsive act that he really didn't think much of. He didn't think that his cousin would care. But when his cousin found him, the other boy actually had punched Pedro hard across the face. And Pedro, on the ground and completely dazed from getting basically knocked out, looked up at him and said, "I'm going to kill you." And his cousin laughed and would just proceed to punch him in the face again. Poking the bear, if you will. And Pedro, he wasn't laughing, and he also didn't forget. So weeks would pass, and the cousin wouldn't apologize, and other relatives heard about the incident and kind of mocked Pedro for being weak. Different times. And inside him, something began to fester. And this wasn't just anger, it turned into an obsession. And the opportunity for revenge came at the sugarcane mill, where Pedro and his cousin were assigned to feed cane stalks into an industrial press.
Oh my god. Bumblebee versus Bumblebee.
Foreshadowing! And the press is basically 2 giant steel rollers that crush the stalks into a pulp. So Pedro would do his job and also wait for his moment. And then, without any warning, Pedro would shove his cousin into the rollers. And his cousin's arm would get stuck into the press, and it would crush it all the way up to his shoulder until the machine just completely jammed out. And Pedro, still not being satisfied with this revenge, would proceed to pick up pruning shears and stab his cousin repeatedly, just trying to reduce the body enough so it could still push through the press. Just, I mean, foul terrifying. But the attack would be interrupted by workers who heard the screams, and his grandfather would turn up just in time to actually turn off the machine before his cousin could get fully pulled into this press. So Pedro would naturally be arrested, but only as a minor. And with pressure from his grandfather, he would actually be released within days.
Yo,
So his
says
only
you were playing Rocket
punishment
League on
was that
Side,
he was
like,
ordered
yeah,
to
I
clean
goof.
the machine of the blood and flesh,
right
and
there,
that
it's
would
named
take him about
TFT.
4 weeks.
Forgot to change it.
That's not a punishment. If I said shut up to my mom, I would get more of a punishment than that. What the f? And Pedro, later in life, would retell the story with just pure amusement, laughing as he described the attack. Because he felt no remorse for his cousin because his cousin had wronged him and he was bringing him to justice in his mind. The balance had been restored, basically. And with that, Pedro Rodriguez Filho felt his first taste of justice. And of something else too, which was pleasure and the urge to kill had awakened. So in 1968, Pedro was 14 years old, and this is when his life would take an irreversible turn, because his father, Pedro Sr., had worked as a night janitor at a local school, but was abruptly fired without severance after being accused of stealing food and supplies during his shift. And though Pedro Sr. denied all allegations, his word was dismissed in favor of a daytime guard who claimed Pedro Sr. was responsible for it. And the consequences were devastating for the family, because with his father jobless and branded as a thief, the Rodriguez family spiraled into poverty. And Pedro would watch as his siblings just went hungry and his mother, Manuela, cried in silence. And Pedro believed that his father had been wronged, because although Pedro Sr. was kind of a piece of shit, he didn't steal. So Pedro believed that the balance once again needed to be restored, and someone had to pay. So Pedro would just retreat into the wilderness, armed with a 36 caliber rifle, a machete, and a green army backpack, and he built a makeshift camp in the forest. He just went full feral mode, and he would live here for months, surviving off wild game. He's 14 at this time. He just disappeared and started just living off the land, just planning and waiting. Because this wasn't a retreat. He was just meticulously planning something. And one night, Pedro laid in wait outside the deputy mayor's house, the very man who had authorized his father's dismissal. And when the deputy arrived in the Jeep, Pedro raised his grandfather's rifle and fired. And he would shoot the man and he would die instantly. And that's when Pedro would just flee into the dark. And this would be the first man that Pedro had killed, because his cousin didn't die in that incident somehow. I don't know how he didn't die, but he didn't. But this would be the first man that he would kill, and he would not be the last. But he said when it was done, he felt no remorse, he felt satisfaction, and he felt righteous. But the injustice hadn't been fully avenged at this point. Not yet. Because there was still someone responsible for the pain his family was facing. So he allegedly told himself, moving forward, he would tell the victims why he was going to kill them. Sound like anybody we know?
Tonight's the night.
So Pedro would wait for the right time to strike his next victim. And it would be a month later when Pedro returned to the school where his father once worked. And his next target? The day guard. The man he believed had falsely accused Pedro Sr. and ruined his entire family's life. So Pedro would wait outside the storeroom where the guard usually began his shift. So when the man arrived, Pedro would again lift his gun, but he wouldn't shoot just yet. He would actually force the man into a chair. And then he told him exactly why he was going to die, saying,
"Did you see what you did? It destroyed my family. My brothers are starving because of you. Is it fair that you did this?"
And the guard would just sob and break down and beg for his life. But Pedro wouldn't have it, and he just shot him twice. And then he would pile boxes and furniture over the body and set it all on fire before fleeing the scene. Once again, do not wrong this guy, my lord. And he's 14 at this point. So with the authorities now closing in, Pedro just went into hiding. And he would completely flee metropolitan Sao Paulo, taking refuge in a home with his godmother. And it would be there that he met a woman that would change his life. And that woman was Botinha. And Botinha was a widowed drug trafficker known for her beauty, influence, and iron fist of control of a local criminal organization. And she would just take Pedro in. And she would actually become his lover, which which I'm not sure of the age of her, but she was definitely a lot older. But she would have a lot of influence over him, and she would actually start to work him in the drug trade. And though Pedro was still a minor, obviously, his relationship with Botinha granted him unusual status and power within the gang. But his rise in this power kind of stirred resentment from older traffickers, who saw him as just an upstart. And according to one of the rivals' girlfriends, Pedro had been targeted for assassination at this point. And after she told Pedro, he constantly kept one eye open. And soon after all this, Pedro would actually be invited to a lagoon, supposedly for a swim just to smoke with the boys. But as they started walking towards the water, Pedro would slowly become more and more suspicious, because the others were acting kind of strangely, and they were armed. So Pedro, being Pedro, would pull his gun first, and he would order them to disarm themselves. And instead of listening to the child, they ran away, and that's when Pedro would just light them up. He would open fire, killing 2 and hospitalizing a 3rd. And whether it was paranoia
Dang,
or
got my
legitimate
butt.
self-defense, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Pedro survived, and now he completely ruled through fear. And from that moment on, Pedro's reputation just exploded. He became known as Padrinho Cartucheira, which means cartridge Petey, which is a reference to his favorite weapon, a 2-shot
those roles
sawn-off
and
shotgun.
none of
And he would work
these?
with a trusted pair of partners,
T?
Gaucinho and Zé Capeta. And the trio would carry out multiple crimes across cities like Jacara, even double-crossing rival dealers. And Pedro was just known to live on the edge, not to be f***ed with, if you will. But he slept in cars, cemeteries, and churches, and he hid from both police and death squads, who were basically notorious vigilante groups made up of off-duty cops who executed suspected criminals
Fred, I have a
with
question. If you
impunity.
get
So he
mail,
would be
do you
doing
open
his
it right
thing,
away, or
living
do
on
you
the
leave it sitting
edge,
around?
doing
Not like a
crime, and then
package,
one
but
day,
like, oh
karma
no, like
would
I
get him
open
back,
everything
and he
immediately.
would be ambushed. And during this ambush, Botinha would be killed, and Pedro would be wounded. So Pedro, just shattered and completely in poor health now, sought refuge again with his family, because he just lost the love of his life, and, you know, the person that introduced him to this whole crime world basically groomed him, and he was wounded. So he would seek refuge with his family, but this time his relatives practiced Candomblé Macumba, which is an Afro-Brazilian religion involving spiritual possession and ritual
Yeah, I thought it was
sacrifice,
weird.
sometimes referred
I don't
to
think I
as
opened my mail
black
right away.
magic. And they put
I mean,
Pedro
I
through
feel
a
like
ceremony
you-
involving him drinking the blood of a black cat.
If you can tell that it
dancing,
might be like
drumming,
something
and a
important, you
ritual
probably do,
burial
right?
of the carcass with seeds inside. And a short time
If you're
later,
like,
Pedro would
"Ooh,
actually go to retrieve
ooh,
the
I probably
seeds
should
from the
open
buried
this."
carcass and wear them as a
Like, if
necklace.
it's, like,
And this
seriously
represented
timely,
being
open
a
now.
spiritual
Would you open
talisman
it?
that he believed would make him completely invincible. And he would go on to say,
From then on, the cops opened
Yeah,
fire,
usually.
but
See,
the
that-
bullets didn't hit me.
he claimed
It's just, I
Nothing
hate.
would stop me.
So
have
after
a lot
this,
going
his
on in my brain all
crimes
the
would
time. I got a bunch of
escalate,
mental
his
clutter,
methods
so,
grew
like, having,
bolder,
like, other
and he would not just be
clutter, like,
known as
mail,
Cartridge Petey. He would be
tough.
called something new, but only after he had committed his most violent
Like, my
offense to date,
messages,
something
I
that would
always
turn
have,
him
like,
into the
everything
legend
read
he's
or
known
just, like,
as
turned
today.
off
So
so I
after
don't
the
see it.
bloodshed, betrayals, and rituals that
Dude, I'm
had
rich.
defined his early teens, Pedro would find something very unexpected, and that was love again. And while living in Campo Grande, a city just west of Rio de Janeiro, Pedro met a young woman named Maria Aparecida Olympia. And for the first time, the boy who had killed his way through the slums of Sao Paulo seemed to have a future beyond just vengeance. And Pedro and Maria fell in love. And soon, Maria would become pregnant. So they moved into a small shack, and Pedro kept supporting them the only way he knew how, by operating outside the law. So he would continue stealing from corrupt traffickers, robbing from businesses who cheated the poor, and reselling stolen goods to dealers he believed were just. So everything he's doing, even though it's against the law, he's like kind of doing it like Robin Hood. Like anybody that's bad he would steal from, and then he would give back where he could. So he was like the good bad guy, if you will, the vigilante. And Pedro saw himself as a vigilante and not a criminal. But in his mind, he was doing moral work. He protected the weak and he punished the wicked. And he provided for the woman he loved and the child they were expecting. But that illusion of peace wouldn't last, because Pedro at this point had made a load of enemies. Enemies that would not forgive. So one day after work, Pedro would return back to his shack that he shared
if
with
it's like
his love,
a
and he
death
would find it
thing,
to
I just
be
goes out, you're like,
silent.
yeah, that's
and
not
inside,
my
he would
worry.
find Maria
Not my
his
monkey
pregnant
circus.
girlfriend dead, murdered along with the man Pedro had asked to protect her while he was away. And the scene was horrific because the killer had actually used their blood to write a message for Pedro on the wall saying, "We will get you." And at this point, she had been 7 months pregnant. And at this point, Pedro's life had already been drenched in blood, and now he was just consumed in rage. Because now it wasn't just justice he needed to serve, it was personal. So Pedro would set out and he would spend over a year hunting. He would interrogate anyone he thought might have information. He tortured people who didn't give answers fast enough. But for a long time, he would kind of come up with nothing. And he killed so many, wronged so many, that he no longer knew where to begin. And then one day, at a bar, someone would approach him. And it would be a woman. And she said she had actually been looking for him because she was the ex-wife of a man named China. And China was a drug trafficker Pedro had betrayed years earlier, stealing his drugs and guns and selling them off to a rival. And China had never forgotten this. And according to her, China had actually ordered for Maria's murder. And the woman who came up to Pedro in the bar would go on to show him her bruises and scars from China. And Pedro believed her. And she would actually tell him something else. And that was that China's brother is actually getting married that weekend. And she would tell him exactly
Luckily
where.
it's on,
You guys ever heard of the Red Wedding?
So hopefully it'll be open.
Really bad. So Pedro would call up his old allies, Guachino and Zacapeta, and he would tell them, quote unquote,
"We're going to a wedding. Every man there gets a bullet. But if you shoot a woman or child, you'll have to answer to me."
Which,
I get
listen,
this. 'Cause
I know
it's
this guy is a really
three-cost.
bad guy, but
Stabby kitty.
a straight up action movie line right there. That, like, pluck that out, put that into a movie. He's a piece of shit. He kills people, but you know, like that goes hard as a line by itself. So Pedro and his compadres would go to this wedding, and the venue was full. And the guests were drinking and dancing and toasting the groom and bride, and Pedro and his men slipped inside completely undetected. And Pedro would approach the doorman claiming to be an honored guest of China. And moments later, Pedro spotted China and raised his 12-gauge sawn-off shotgun, and he would fire right into China's chest, killing him instantly on his wedding day. And the rest was
Once again, this is the
complete
guy we talking about.
carnage. Pedro and his crew opened fire on male guests, sparing only women and children. And 7 men would be killed, and 16 more would
Already
be
a
wounded.
volley
And China's
bear?
mother was actually hit. But Pedro would later say that was her own
Well,
doing
he's
as
gone
she tried
already.
to shield her son. And after the massacre, the trio
Oh,
would
this
just
is the
walk
wrong
out the
guy.
front door, just calmly and confidently. And they would even go to a nearby bar to get a drink to Selly. And from that day on, he was no longer just a teenage killer. In the streets, he was now known as Padrino Matador, which means Little
must be
Petey
annoying.
the Killer. And that name was everywhere. He was like a mythic figure, the boy who avenged his unborn child. It was like movie shit to people. The man who massacred an entire wedding party in
That's
the
what he
name of
looked like.
justice, and who claimed to be guided not by impulse but by a moral code. Sounds like somebody else we know.
There were so many lessons in the vaunted code of Harry.
So the wedding massacre would send shockwaves through the criminal
I was hoping to get
underworld.
this
Because
guy for
7
free,
men
but we'll
lay
have to
dead,
wait.
16 wounded, and none of them were innocent in Pedro's eyes. But to law enforcement, it was a complete bloodbath. And after the wedding, Pedro didn't go into hiding. He just leaned into the myth. And he would actually go on to take up a pair of twins in a polyamorous threesome relationship and begin to live like a complete gangster. Because now he had notoriety, money, and respect. And he even got tattooed across his arms the words, "I kill for pleasure," which... How is this guy real? How is this guy real?
it.
And on the
I just
other,
see
he
more people
tattooed the name
now.
Maria, and beneath it, it
That's the only
says,
problem.
"I can kill for love." Like, who wrote this guy's
Yeah,
lore?
there's some way
Who?
more
But
people than
Pedro claimed that he killed daily, and he would say, "I would summon the devil." It was a ritual. It was like, this body is yours. This blood is yours. Then he would find a man, someone who'd beaten a woman or preyed on the weak, and he would, you know, drink their blood.
Yay!
Because that's It's what he grew up thinking he had to do. Just as his grandmother had once told
Really,
him
we watch again?
would make him stronger. But mere months after avenging Maria, another personal grievance would arise. And this time, it would involve his cousin. Pedro would discover that his favorite female cousin had become pregnant, but his boyfriend disgracefully refused to marry her, and he would just abandon her and his unborn child. So Pedro, naturally enraged by the mistreatment of his cousin, took it upon himself to retaliate. And he would hunt down the boyfriend and shoot him in the head in cold blood as punishment for dishonoring the family. Don't with this guy, man. But in Pedro's eyes, this was just another righteous kill. The man had wronged his flesh and blood, so lethal vengeance was warranted. In Pedro's mind, not mine. And this incident would just add to the growing tally of Pedro's victims, proving that no perceived injustice against his family would go unanswered, even relatively minor domestic ones. So Pedro's reputation would continue to grow, and he was now a fully wanted man, hunted by both the police and the death squads that we talked about before. But even the death squads kind of hesitated around Padrino Matador because his name carried weight and his reach extended farther than most knew. But luckily, legend is no shield, and the myth doesn't protect against betrayal, because Pedro's inner circle began to unravel. His two buddies, the men who stood beside him at the wedding massacre, were both killed, one by police and one by a death squad. And though Pedro had kind of always lived as a loner, paranoia began to set in, and justifiably so, because his twin lover's father owned a bar in Sao Paulo, and Pedro would visit this bar pretty often. And one day, while he sat drinking at the bar, the police would come in because the twins' father had tipped them off. So Pedro would be ambushed in a very dramatic raid. It was just a hail of bullets and screaming voices, and he was actually very badly wounded in the firefight, collapsing to the ground and starting to bleed out. And he would pass out to the sound of officers yelling for his death. But when he woke, he was actually chained to a hospital bed, surrounded by nurses, police, and television cameras. The vigilante killer was caught, and the myth had been subdued. And Brazil's most feared teenage executioner was about to enter a place even more violent than the streets, which was Brazil's prisons. So Pedro would spend 25 days recovering, shackled in place, before being transferred to prison. And the guards gave him a choice: either protect custody or Gen Pop, general population in the prison, where the friends, brothers, and sons of victims of Pedro's were waiting in wake. But Pedro didn't give a and he went to Gen Pop, which is crazy because there's just lines of people waiting to kill Pedro.
Oh
so
my
he
God,
entered a system notorious for its brutality, overcrowding, and corruption, and where guards often handed over power to the inmates and violence ruled everything. Like one of the scariest places you can go on Earth. And on the ride to prison, Pedro was chained inside the transport truck with another man. And this man was a serial rapist, just the lowest of the low. By the time they got there, only one man was left alive in the back of the van. So from the moment he arrived, Pedro sent a message: he would not be intimidated. And within days, 5 men tried to ambush Pedro in the yard. But when it was over, 3 were dead and 2 ran off bleeding.
Oh my God,
and Pedro, he walked away basically unharmed. Pedro had quite literally entered one of the most violent prison systems in the world, and he just made it his bitch. Because he would just turn anything into a weapon. Spoons, wires, shivs, just his bare hands. And when he couldn't find a blade, he just relied on his fists, or his specialty, breaking necks. How is breaking necks a specialty? That's a very hard thing to do. They make it look so easy in movies and stuff. They just go, that's a really hard thing to do. Not that I would know. I just know because I'm not going to talk about it. Never mind. I literally asked doctors.
I don't get one.
Like, hey, everybody makes it so easy, like to break necks in movies, and they're like, no, it's really hard. You need brute force to do that shit. Anyway, I'm digging a hole right now. But to maintain this type of strength, you know, to be a break-making specialist, he would maintain his strength daily, punching the concrete cell walls until they were slick with his blood. Also building his pain resistance like armor. And he would learn martial arts in prison, and he would lift homemade weights made from water bottles and broomsticks. But Pedro wasn't impulsive. Sometimes he would even befriend his victims, gain their trust, eat meals with them, even hug them, only to kill them months later once they were comfortable. He was just like a meticulous planner.
said
Like,
GG and they had something huge,
unfortunately,
yes.
he was
They'll
very
say, "Yep,
smart.
GG,"
Reminds me a lot
and
of
I'll
Ed
look, and they
Kemper
have,
in
like,
a way. Like, he was very
10
patient, and he
of-
observed, and he learned. But Ed
So,
Kemper
like,
was just like a whole
10
other stream, was not a
Noxus,
vigilante. He's just a
10
monster. If you
Yordle,
want to know more about that one, you
10
go to this video
Ionia.
over here. But anyway,
That's
Pedro
GG.
stood
Like,
on a
nobody, you
a
can't beat
pedestal
that
of
unless you also have a board of 10.
morals, basically. But he believed
And I think
in
10 Ionia
execution and not
beats 10
emotion.
Yordle.
He didn't have regret after he killed somebody,
Yeah.
and he didn't hesitate when he did kill someone. And in time,
Yeah,
Pedro
she
became
F1.
the boogeyman behind bars. Other inmates feared him, guards learned to stay the out of his way, and still, he kept killing. So Pedro would just thrive in this environment, and he did so through murder. Bad guy. I cannot say enough. This is a bad guy, okay? I know I'm saying this like he's like,
Ionia.
dude, look at, well, this is crazy what he did. I mean, it is. It's f***ing crazy. This whole story sounds like it's straight out of a movie. It's not. He's killing people. He's bad. He's a piece of shit. Are these bad people that he's killing? Maybe. Maybe. Do they deserve to live? Probably not. But that's not for me to say, okay? And that's not for a human that has
Yeah,
no
everybody
just
waves
or
the white
right
flag.
to
So,
kill
like, you
someone
see how that little
to
frog guy
decide.
is waving a
so
blue
I'm just
flag?
putting that out there. I'm
Yeah,
just telling
we
a
would-
story.
we would
a
wave a
real
white
story
flag.
that's f***ing insane. But anyway, back in prison, not all of his killings were actually driven by revenge. And in one case, that became folklore in the Brazilian press. Pedro claimed to have killed a cellmate simply because the man
Oh, they're
snored too
giving
loudly.
1 gold for Ionia
Get on this guy's
takedowns.
nerves, I swear. Oh my
Nice.
god. But later, he
Ionia?
would clarify that the truth was much darker. Because during a hospital transfer, Pedro had shared a room with a prisoner who watched That's why I killed him. And he would slit the snoring man's throat.
Oh,
It probably also was a little bit because he was snoring. It was probably like too for Pedro because he's crazy. And then there's Claudio, the traitor. He was actually a former friend of Pedro, who Pedro had actually protected on the inside. And Claudio was eventually released and welcomed into Pedro's family. And he would even begin a relationship with Pedro's sister. Good
Oh,
luck,
yeah,
dude.
Stabby
What the-
Kitty
don't do
survived.
that. But after an altercation with Pedro's brother, Claudio shot and killed
Stabby
Pedro's
Kitty
sister,
getting a freaking-
Savannah. Run! Actually, don't run. I mean, you're a piece of shit. You killed an innocent person, so you should go back to jail. But also, run! So when Claudio would naturally return to prison for killing Pedro's sister, he expected some
Strops.
serious f***ing vengeance for Pedro, because he's been around the block. So day by day would go by, and he would just be looking over his shoulder, waiting for Pedro to get his vengeance. Oh, one day he did. Because while Claudio was studying in his cell, Pedro would waltz in, and he would grab him by the hair and cut through his throat with a knife, completely
Oh, we meet again,
decapitating
Stabby
him.
Kitty.
Pedro would go on to say,
He was my friend,
We
but I
meet
just had to
again,
kill him.
Stabby Kitty.
Unjustified.
Oh
It's like,
yeah,
he
just
killed
hit
his
my,
sister,
just
which
hit my
again,
freaking.
no, killing is
Oh,
bad.
no.
Killing
Wait
is
a
really
second.
bad. But what? You
Wait a
poked
second.
the bear of
Wait a
bears.
second.
So as his
Wait a
infamy
second.
grew, Pedro began
Wait a
receiving
second.
letters from people on the outside,
Oh, there's
begging
Scion
him
again.
to kill
Oh, he got 8
specific
again.
inmates. He was becoming like a bounty hunter within jail. Anyone
That's
from
good.
rapists to child essayers or extortionists, men who had harmed the innocent. Scum of the earth, basically. And sometimes Pedro would oblige, but he did refuse to kill for
I'm
money, so
10,
technically he wasn't
and
like a
I
bounty
was
hunter. He was
barely
like a
getting-
pro bono bounty hunter, I guess. But he evaluated each case meticulously to make sure that it was justified to do so. He was like a kind of a responsible killer. The morals are kind of all over the place. It's really hard. He's a bad guy, but so are rapists, you know? But in his own
I'm just
mind,
really
if he
not getting
deemed
the
the man
5 costs
guilty
that I
enough,
need.
he would strike.
Do you have
Similar
Xerath?
to
No.
Dexter. And sometimes
What
he
do they
would
have?
beat them to death, sometimes he would stab them to
Nasus.
death, and sometimes he would throw you down an elevator shaft. You never knew what was coming with Pedro. Kind of a surprise guy. And he even described luring his victims into false friendships, kind of like we talked about before. Sharing food, talking kindly, before striking with absolute ruthlessness. I can't imagine just being like best buds with Pedro and just like
Never
skipping through the
see this
halls
build
of
hit
prison and
level
eating
build hit
food
level
only
10.
to get like
Crazy, right?
sandwich shoved down my throat along with a fist. And Pedro would even go on to later tell a TV reporter about the day that he set a personal record, a PR. 16 people killed in one day. But the story is kind
I
of
don't wanna
murky
do that
and
because
unconfirmed
Volibear's
by
my
public
more, like,
records. Low-key, believe it, after everything I've heard about him so far. But Pedro claimed that a prisoner spread a rumor that led to the death of Pedro's
Actually,
friend.
no.
And in
Not
retaliation,
do
he
that,
said he
because
entered
he
their
leaves
ward
for a
and
little
went
bit, so
on
I
a
want Volibear,
stabbing
like,
spree,
doing
claiming
some-
afterward that he actually couldn't hear for 3 days from all
Here,
the
eat my
screaming.
Kaboku.
So whether true or mythologized, it fit the image Pedro had cultivated. A relentless executioner who claimed to purge prison of those he deemed unworthy of life. Guy was the Grim Reaper of prison, and his official body count was 71.
All right, Stabby Kitty,
confirmed
let's grow
kills
up.
at this point,
Let's
but
grow
he
up a little bit
insisted
here.
the number was much higher.
Well,
And
let's
again,
grow up a
low-key
little bit
believed
here.
him.
This
So the
is
state had
pretty
given him a cell,
ridiculous.
and Pedro turned it into his killing fields. But it's just crazy to me that they didn't separate him from Gen Pop after he killed, I don't know, one
Just everything's
person?
like a 2 cost
Maybe
for them.
2. They were like, hey, maybe we
2-star
should
for
put
them.
this guy in his own place. Maybe we should put this guy in solitary confinement and not with other people, because he tends to kill everyone that wrongs him. And in prison, that happens a lot.
I can't
so I don't know.
remember
Brazil
if
prisons are just like
I
just otherworldly insane. So I
blocked
don't
that.
know
I
how
did
you
lock
fix
it,
that.
yeah.
But anyway, they didn't, and he killed a lot of people. But none of the murders Pedro committed in prison would compare
Glad,
to
don't worry.
one that hit closest to home. Because one day, the guards called him to the warden's office, and he was just surrounded by officers with
Where's
drawn
my
rifles
Volibear?
as they delivered the news to him, which was that I get
Are
chills
you
even saying it
kidding
because
me?
I'm scared for everyone involved, but
God.
that his mother, Manuela, was murdered, and that she had been stabbed 21
bullcrap.
times, and that her body was ripped apart with a machete, and the killer was her
there's my
own
Volibear.
husband, Pedro's father. I have so many chills saying this right now because I know what's gonna happen next, and I'm still scared. So Pedro's father was arrested and was now in custody at the same prison where Pedro was serving time. And when Pedro was given the news, he was completely silent. And he would actually ask to attend the morgue viewing. And the guards, watching him carefully, did allow it. And standing over his mother's mutilated body, he would make a promise to her. And that promise would be that
Are
he
you
would
kidding
kill
me?
his
We're
father,
so
and he would
close,
eat
bro.
his heart. And that chance came not
Oh
long
my
after,
God.
because Pedro would fake an illness.
Oh my
and
God,
by
I
doing
just
so,
got-
he would
I missed
lure
out
a
on
guard
Kaboku,
into
too.
his cell, overpower him, and steal his gun and his keys. Pedro was just seeing red after he got that news, and he would continue to see red during this whole ordeal. So he'd move on to other guards,
doesn't
lock
make any
them up,
changes in
and then
this.
walk to the wing where his father was being held. And when he entered that wing, all the inmates fled because they knew what was about to happen. But the only person who didn't flee was Pedro Sr., who was just standing there completely still. And he allegedly said to Pedro, "You are right, my son." But Pedro didn't reply. Pedro would just lunge forward and plunge a knife into his father and
was
begin
not close.
counting the stabs that he plunged into his father.
I'm
out
so
loud.
annoyed. I'm
1,
so
2,
annoyed.
3, and he would go on to count 22 times. One more than the amount of times that his father stabbed his mother. Pedro had now delivered the justice he felt the system never could. And for the Brazilian justice system, Pedro Rodrigues Filho was an anomaly. A man who broke the system simply by surviving it. He had been convicted at this point of 71 murders, with unofficial estimates claiming more. And for those deaths both on the streets and
Cyan.
inside the prison walls,
Cyan, are you
Pedro
gonna-
was sentenced to nearly
Okay,
400
yep, just dance.
years behind bars.
Yeah, that
His
makes sense.
initial
Just dance,
conviction
Cyan.
alone was
You know, I didn't want you to
126 years.
participate in
And
that
additionally,
anyways,
killing
right?
inside prison pushed his sentence to well over 3 centuries. But in Brazil, sentencing wasn't so simple. Under the law at the time, no individual could
Last
actually
roll is
be in
crazy
prison for more
on
than
that.
30 years, no matter how many crimes they committed, which is beyond f***ed up. So the rule meant that even a man who
All
killed
right, this
dozens
is for the
could, in
marbles.
theory, just walk free
can't be
after
10,
30
right?
years.
'Cause
So
I
by
don't think that he-
2003,
Yeah, he's
Pedro
9.
had reached his 30-year mark.
Well,
so he had technically served his time. And the
all my
authorities
stuff
just
is
rattled
2
by
costs.
his infamy, and the public
2-star.
outcry scrambled for ways to delay his release. And through legal maneuvering, they extended his imprisonment for 4 additional years, citing his continued violence and danger to society. But they could not hold him in forever. Because
Dude,
there were now
what the
whispers
frick,
of
man? It's
using
not
a
even
now
close.
repealed public security decree. One that allowed indefinite
This is the other B
psychiatric
version.
confinement for those deemed mentally unfit. And Pedro had,
Stabby
after all,
kitty in
being
the end.
diagnosed by multiple psychiatrists as a psychopath, which duh, and he was incapable of remorse and driven by violent self-affirmation. But unfortunately, that loophole was gone. And by law, even
All
Brazil's
right.
most prolific
I think
serial
that was a
killers
good
could
climb.
be set free. And on
About
April
y'all.
24th, 2007, after 34 years in
Good
prison,
climb.
Pedro
Yes, no.
Rodriguez Filio
Maybe so.
walked, strolled, and danced out of prison because the system had done all
Much
it
better
could,
climb.
and
Yeah,
it
that was
still
much better
wasn't
than, you know,
enough.
the
For
last
world
one.
Pedro had stepped into was
We got that
unrecognizable.
LP.
His technology had changed, cities had
We were a little
changed, and even the
goofy
people
with
looked
the
different.
seventh,
Pedro
but after
didn't know
that,
how
we
to ride
picked
a
it up
bus,
and
use
got
a cell
second
phone,
first for
or
a second.
operate
I agree, I
modern
agree, I
farm
agree.
equipment.
Okay,
So the man
I will
who
see
once
you
ruled the prison yards
tomorrow.
had to ask strangers how to navigate
meow.
everyday
Toodaloo.
life. So Pedro would move into a small
Good
pink
night.
cottage surrounded by trees.